Good morning, good day, and good evening. Welcome back to Tech of a Tea. This is episode 167, probably? Close enough. And today, we have a very interesting guest. Welcome to the show, Jorge Castro. How's it going?
Hello, everyone.
This is someone who you guys probably know a lot of the work that he's done, but you may not know the face, because I didn't realize, this is something I was going to say before, I didn't realize how much of your stuff I already knew about, and didn't realize it was you that was doing it.
Yeah, invisibility. It's the number one way to stay sane in open source. You can't flame me if you don't know who I am. You know?
Like, I didn't realize that Yipsy Dange was your site, even though it says who the author is on like the blog post. It just never clicked with me. And then like I type your name and Linux, and it's like, you've authored some stuff on OMG Ubuntu. Then you sent me the FlatHub thing where it's like, de facto community manager or whatever. It's like, you just
you actually review one of my blog posts or one of your videos once, and you're like, I can't understand what this guy's saying because his grammar is just so horrible. I was like, yeah, dude.
Yeah, that
guilty.
That does, that sounds like something I would have said. Yeah. I feel like
it's okay. I'm not a master of the English language.
No,
neither am I. You read the documentation I write.
Yeah, English is the only language I speak, but I can speak it well enough. I'm not good at it.
I agree.
I get these people in my comment section every so often, and like they have English as like a second language, and they write this perfect paragraph, nothing wrong with it whatsoever, and they're like, sorry about my English. Like, what?
Yeah.
What do you? I know that you're like worried about it. Maybe you have like issues, speaking English, but don't worry about the typing.
Yeah, I never say that because I guarantee I cannot speak your language like at all.
But before we go completely sidetracked off of that, why don't you explain a bit about what you do?
What I do now, or what I've been doing this whole time? Like,
whichever one you want to go with. We're probably gonna do a bit of everything.
Oh, I don't know. So I have been around a while. I'm an open source community manager since 2006, 2008, something like that. I forget when my first real job. Well, my first real job was at Canonical on Ubuntu in open source, because I was a administrator at a university before, and I'd been using Ubuntu since the Warty Warthog. See, here's where I'll give your readers. I'll give you the nice little tidbits everyone forgets about. Is when it first came out, it didn't have a name. So when you when you typed apt-get update, it would say nonameyet.com. Right. And that was the repositories, because it wasn't called Ubuntu yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then someone was the name. And then one day I upgraded, and there was that name Ubuntu. I never heard of it before. And there was like naked people on the wallpaper. Like, back then they were like very risque, because they were kind of going for the United Colors of Benetton or whatever. Look it up. Like, I'm not making up anything.
I know you're not joking here. I did get sent an article about this ages back with like a link to the mailing list with this giant discussion, like with some angry people like, why are there naked people here? Kids are going to use Ubuntu. You can't have this here.
Yeah, and they would put the logo like strategically over people's part. It was like, man. Yeah, see, so when people tell you Ubuntu's an ancient word that means you can't install Debian, the more positive way I like to think about it is naked Debian for the masses, right? Like, this is the yeah. So it was brown. I was there through the brown period, I guess. I guess what they call.
Yeah, Warty Warthog was not a pretty. It had the the styling of modern GNOME, but it was not pretty.
Yeah. Okay, so pop quiz. What do you think the major selling feature of 4.10 was? It was the most mind-boggling thing that like Linux users up to that point was just like the biggest pain in the ass.
Pre-installed drivers?
No, this is before then. Okay. This is before then. Yeah. Everyone forgets this, which is why I've been thinking about it. Yeah,
drivers was the only one I could think of. What was
it? Because the driver manager thing and all that stuff that came way later. Yeah.
Okay.
This was basic stuff like auto detecting when you stick the USB key in.
Oh.
That was a big thing because back then, the folks at Novell/Simian were working. It was called Project. Oh man, Project Utopia. That's what they called it, and that was auto detecting everything that you plugged in.
See, being an Arch Linux user,
and then the Nautilus window would pop up. We thought that was the coolest thing ever. And up until like the cube and all that stuff, that probably was the coolest thing ever.
Being an Arch Linux user, you still have to set that up manually. So, you know, like all of your other devices, like webcams and stuff, that's fine. But there's no auto mounting. You got to install something to auto mount stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people it's hard to set things up for yourself, right? You think that's hard? Try setting it up to work for everybody else. That's like, that sucks. Like, you know, that's one thing I think a lot of like the kind of elite Linux users forget. It's like, oh, cool. You typed a bunch of stuff and it worked on your computer.
Yeah.
Now do that 50,000 times. Then let me know how awesome you are. You know, then it becomes really hard.
Yeah. Just as we were seeing before, like just before we started recording, for some reason, I don't know why. I got no idea. My GPU's just not being detected by OBS. I don't know why. Something happened. Like little things like this, where some random person is going to have some problem and nobody knows why that problem is happening. Like that is why, like doing the distro management stuff, the building stuff for the masses is really difficult because you may understand, you know, a small subset of systems incredibly well. And I'm sure a lot of people do, but wait until someone comes along and they're like, yeah, I'm using this weird esoteric system that nobody in their right mind is using, and your software doesn't work properly.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Because snowflakes are bad. Remember when you got to the one part you were explaining all my cloud mumbo jumbo?
Oh yeah,
that's like one of the tenets, right? Snowflakes are bad, right? You don't want pets, you want cattle, right? You want to stay within the lines that have been colored for you. You always have the freedom to go outside the lines, but then the expectations that something's going to blow up in your face.
Actually, now I'm confused. What are we talking about here? Is this one of your blog posts that I did a video on?
No, the video that you did on uBlue, because you were reading my webpage, and I called it a cloud native desktop, and then you were like, whoa.
Yeah, I'd never heard that
word
before. Yeah. Well, that's actually a good place to start, because I saw a lot of people in my comment section got very confused by the term cloud native. So just give a brief. Yeah.
We'll tie it into my little story.
Okay,
then.
sure. We can do that.
All right. So I did Ubuntu for a while. Sometimes people say what the worst Ubuntu release was. My candidate for that, for those of you that are listening, I'd love to hear your commenters say what they thought their worst one was. And I think by far it was 904. Because Intel was in the process of rewriting their Intel driver. And back then, especially, like, there was no System 76, there was no Sputnik, there was no HP Dev 1 and all that stuff. Like, you had to buy that ThinkPad that Matthew Garrett had, or you're going to have a shitty time, you know? So, Intel was in the middle of, like, rewriting their driver, and it became i965, I think. I don't remember. And, things were already not good because netbooks had come out earlier before, and they use these chips called the Pulsebo graphics. Someone should do a video on that nightmare. The driver was being rewritten upstream, and like we had to ship a certain one of the one. And it was just a bad cycle for everybody. And I just remember being like, man. And at the time, the Jesse Barnes had just started at Intel at the time, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm really stressing out." I was like, "I'm sorry, man, this sucks." But then 1004 I consider our best release, because at the time a lot of people were working really hard with a lot of Debian and Ubuntu maintainers wear the same hat. So there's actually been a lot of collaboration there over the years, like, and you know, to this day. And they managed to time it so like they were binary compatible. Like they used the same compiler, they had the same major version of glibc, and just for a while that was just, you know, and that was like the last major release of GNOME 2 before the new, you know, the new thing. So it's almost kind of like, you know, this is saying goodbye to the old way, you know. It was and it was an amazing, probably 1004 is one of the coolest. Ask anybody who was involved in both Debian and Ubuntu at that time, and it was just, I felt like the, you know, when people say they miss the good old days, that it's that's what they're talking about. That was a fun release. And after that, we did Unity and just like I took a shotgun to the face.
But now there's people that like, because Unity was there for so long, there is a bunch of people that are like, Unity was great and we want Unity back. And now there's the flavor, the Unity flavor.
Yeah. So the first thing we did with Unity was the Ayatana indicators, or the little black ones that went in the top right corner. And then after that, after the team got set up and they figured out how to release stuff and work with GNOME and all that stuff. So that was fun and interesting. Definitely some heated arguments way back in the day. I worked on the indicators for a while. If you're still suffering with those, man, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was gonna last. I don't know it was gonna last that long. Like man, someday someone's gonna figure this out. And man, if you're working on that, I'm sorry. But that was a hard one, especially, it's interesting because back then you had to make a lot of compromises for the Windows system tray. And back then, this is before Proton. And that system tray was the only way there's certain wine apps, they wouldn't work properly without a system tray. Like their instructions would say, right click on the system tray and stuff. And to make that thing work, plus all the stuff that, you wanted to do on a Linux desktop, just a lot of compromises and stuff that ended up, and a lot of smart people work really hard, not me, to like try to make that work.
You're not smart, you didn't work very hard.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember the stuff we didn't have back then, like, distributed version control wasn't nearly as, it was around, but it's not like as ubiquitous as it is today. CI testing, we had to figure that out by hand. And like, in order to find bugs, you had to wait for someone to like install it in their PPA. And then like the feedback cycle was just so crap back then, but it's the best that people had. So we did that. And then I had transitioned actually over to cloud. I went over to Judith. I was like, man, I did my bit for Queen and Country. I'm done with that stuff for a bit. I did. There was a tool back in the day called the Compiz Settings Manager. And if you used it, it would crash your desktop. And this infuriated me. So one day I sent a message to the list. I was like, this thing's got to go. Right. And everybody on the internet hated me that day because they love their bling, right? They love their cube. And little did I know that would prepare me for the stuff that I get today, right? Where it's like, it works for me. If you didn't read the man page, then you're an idiot. And I was I don't know. People kind of want the bling.
Yeah, I get these people in my comments as well. I'm not even like managing something for a community, and I still get these comments when I do like a video on some random piece of software. Like, oh, this thing didn't work. Like, go tell the developer.
Yeah. It's man. Yeah. So that was an interesting time. And around that time, another thing I'm also really proud of is I helped start the NVIDIA PPA. And that was actually the beginning of Linux gaming. And
around what year was that?
Man, when the first Shadow of Mordor came out for Linux, whenever that came out, and I think that was a native. Yeah, I bought every native port. So, and every distro had the driver except Ubuntu, and I was so mad. I was like, this sucks. So I sent a mail to the list. I was like, hey man, can we like figure out drivers? This game's out and cool and stuff like that. It ends up there was a bunch of engineers just waiting for someone to say, hey man, we should set up a side thing. So they did. I asked NVIDIA for money and GPUs. They didn't give us any. We had to use money from Linux users to buy GPUs. And this is an important lesson I want everyone listening here to understand, right? I got no money, no GPUs. Volunteers did all the work. I was fortunate enough to let me work on it. And then obviously the other engineers that reviewed all that work and made sure it shipped in Ubuntu and didn't explode on people's computers and stuff. So like, it was like a genuine like community effort, right? And then years later, all these PPAs and all these drivers are being used to run the cloud, right? And they are all generating millions and millions and millions of dollars for value. And those volunteers that like did all the work, they don't get jack, and that's crappy.
Yeah,
and no matter what you say about Canonical, they deserve a cut.
No, I've talked
everybody
about,
gets a cut except the distro. That sucks.
I've talked
That's
about this
hard.
issue like tons of times. Like you've had cases like Colors.js and Faker.js. You've had LeftPad. You had recently with Core.js. Like there have been these massive situations where developers are just like, they want to make something great and they want people to use it, and they know that if they charge money for it, like they know that developers won't use it. But at the same time, they put all this time into it, and these massive companies like Netflix, like Amazon, like Google are not giving even $1 back to support the project.
Yeah, but they do give back in other ways. Certain companies do. All the ones that you listed do. The problem is that it's not distributed evenly.
Yeah. No, like there are definitely standouts, and they'll get involved in certain like big projects. Like, all of these companies are involved in the Linux kernel, for example, but they're not supporting the individual, like they're using hundreds and thousands of JavaScript libraries, but there's no mention of that. There's no support of that.
Yeah. I think the web people get it the worst, right? Because how many web frameworks are there, right? But like all the large companies understand, SSL is important.
Well, with the web,
they'll definitely invest in that, right? Codecs, Netflix and Codecs and all that open, they'll definitely invest in that. But like a random Node.js library.
Yeah, the other problem with the web, though, is it's this giant dependency tree. So even if they're using, like, let's say React on their front end, React is going to have, 100 dependencies. Those dependencies are going to have other dependencies, and it trickles all the way down to these tiny little libraries like LeftPad. LeftPad, so many projects were reliant on. For anyone who didn't know, there was a time when in JavaScript, you couldn't pad the left side of a string. So you couldn't put, like, spaces there. So what LeftPad would do is pad the left side of a string with a number of characters. Now there is like a function built into JavaScript for it, but there were so many libraries that were reliant on this little thing. It was like 5 lines of code, and when the dev pulled it, it broke so many projects.
Like you could argue the internet was broken that day. Yeah. Amazing, isn't it? I do like, so some organizations are trying to fix it. So like Tidelift is one that's doing it. I have some people that work there. It's pretty cool. GitHub has a cool thing when you turn on sponsors, it will figure out the dependencies and let you split it and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, there's definitely work in that area, I think. But there's always improvements that could be made.
Yeah, for sure.
With everything. Yeah. So I did cloud for a little bit. Then I went to the cloud native space because I really wanted to do Kubernetes at Canonical, and I kind of want to do Kubernetes. And I was like, nope, this is in the like, if you talk to cloud nerds, the first time they saw Kubernetes, like everyone remembers. And I had the opportunity to work at Heptio for the co-creators of Kubernetes, 2 of them. So I did that for a few years, and that was a huge community, right? And it was massive. And I did that for 2 or 3 years. We got bought out by VMware, helped them do that stuff. And that's where I got like my, that's where I learned all the cloud stuff, right? Like automation, like you just automate the hell out of everything, right? Pets not cattle not pets is what one I'll go through, because there's a lot of this stuff that I feel now that I kind of coming back to the desktop, I'm like, nah, this is what we need, right? So like the API driven self-serve model, right? The kind of composability, which is like building, you build basic Lego kits and then you put them together, right? Which you can do today, right? But it's nicer when you have a guarantee that like the hole and the peg are the same,
right?
That kind of stuff. So as I left that, I did VC for a bit. That wasn't for me. And then I did cloud governance for a while. So learning a lot of, when people ask, like, for example, we made a tool that makes sure, hey, if someone checks in a secret into Git, delete it. That kind of stuff, which GitHub does automatically. If you check in your stuff, I don't think they do OBS streaming keys, but definitely your AWS creds. Amazon will automatically will disable that.
Yeah, I've definitely uploaded some API keys for different things throughout. I think I was doing.
Happens to everyone, man. Don't be ashamed.
I think I was doing I think also the project I was doing for the CSIRO, I think it was years back. and I was building some like front end for their. They wanted some like farming data monitoring tool, and I think I uploaded something for that. It wasn't a live system, so it was still like in development. So luckily, but even so, it's still probably not something that should be there.
Yeah. So I did that, and I kind of took a break. I quit my job. I wanted to decompress for a little bit. I'm privileged enough to have some runway there.
Yeah.
Then I started uBlue. Actually, on the side, I've been doing this over 2 years, but it was kind of like the side thing, and it wasn't like very cool, and it was very imperative, very, a community manager's trying to make a distro, haha. Like it would look exactly what you would think if you were to hear that. But over time, I started to hanging out in the Fedora Discord, and people are like, if we did this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. So we started to tease it apart, make it more composable. That's why it's a kit now. Right before, it was basically what Bluefin is now, which is like George's vision of a desktop, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like freaking Ubuntu, right? Like, yeah, of course, right? Like Metallica is going to sound like Metallica too. So, but over time, but I didn't know how to split stuff up because I'm not an engineer,
right?
But as people started to show up, they're like, dude, you could do it this way, you could do it this way. I was like, cool, do a PR, let's see what it looks like. And then one day, Josh and Alex, who are the people who figured out the NVIDIA images, right? Because the project is pretty cool, right? Like Fedora's going to support this. Like they have this. We're just going a little bit early. It's like everyone's going to have one of these. But we would sit there and say, theoretically, if we built the NVIDIA images in CI, your computer would only get the working one. You'd never have to build the stupid driver, and get that black screen, or like there was an update and you didn't reboot and you launched the game and it, actually, I think you wouldn't need to reboot because you wouldn't get the new image until you got to so you don't even have, you even fix that accidentally. And when Josh was talking about it, I was like, hey man, I've been down this road. Like if this will be pretty cool, but I am telling you, inserting yourself as the place for people to report NVIDIA driver issue. not a good plan for long-term mental health. Let me tell you about that.
Yeah,
right now, which is why like we're very careful. Like I say alpha, even though just by its very nature, it tends to be more stable than pretty much anything else. So, we had to think about it and stuff, but at the same time, it was so cool. And I had assembled an NVIDIA machine because as a good Linux user, I've got all the open source now, and I had this old 2080 and I slapped it in and I tried rebooting. Secure boot worked like right away. I was like, that's absurd. There's no way. And at that point, that's when you have to make an open source, because I didn't want to make an open source project. It's hard. You got to make governance and trust and all the stuff I'm doing now. That's why I'm all tired. Like I didn't want to do any of that, but if someone figured out a better way to do NVIDIA and that can hold you off until MVK comes out, you got to do it, So I was like, hey, if we're going to do this, you want to do it? Let's do it, but we're going to have to do it right. We can't, because it is it's an operating system on your computer. We can't, what happens when people don't trust their distros and the distros do bad things, right? So, I was like, hey, we got to make sure any secret, any certificate that we have is accounted for. Everything's in version control. And that's one of the nice things about also getting to go fresh is you don't have to deal with any old infrastructure or migration of stuff or any of that. So I was sitting there with my friends and I was like, man, I think I can run this thing out of GitHub. Like, I think we could run this thing out of GitHub and it would totally work. The only limit is they keep 90 days of your artifacts. So we can only keep 90 days of image backups for you. Right. But that's actually not that bad because usually if you reboot and something's broken, you go back a day, maybe you'll go back a week.
Yeah. No, that's not that big of a deal because when you update Silverblue, like locally, don't you have like 3 or 4 you can like roll back
to? It keeps 2.
2. Okay. Yeah.
2, and then whatever you say, keep this one. You can keep as many as you want.
Sure. Well, assuming you have the hard drive space.
Yeah, but I mean, there's deduplicate. It's doing a bunch of there's papers on that.
Even so, there's gonna be a limit at some point.
Yeah, there's definitely like you don't want,
especially if you're like a laptop user, for example, and you have like a 500 gig hard drive.
Right. What you want is the last working image that you have, right? Maybe one that's a week or a month, And then you always want to keep the one the day you installed it, because that's like a free, it's like a free power wash thing, which I want to do eventually. So yeah, it was like, the free tier's fine. The builders are fine. The first cut, it takes about 2 minutes for a free GitHub runner to build the entire OS, which is like really fast. And then we started adding NVIDIA. The NVIDIA images take any 13 to 20 minutes each. So, and then that's one for each desktop, and then one for 37 and one for 38. And then once 39 comes, the nice thing about Fedora is they only support 3 versions, right? So when 39 comes out, we won't be growing the image space. Like we'll know exactly how much disk space you need, right? Because I don't want to go shopping around for resources until you know exactly how much shit you're using, right? Yeah, that's the plan.
Well, this sort of leads me into one of the questions that showed up. You're doing everything with GitHub, and I had some people being like, is GitHub like okay with you just basically running effectively a distro out of GitHub's infrastructure?
Yeah, we turned GitHub into a operating system generator. Yeah. So again, with the cloud native parts, is I went and added them up. We've built 600 some images in the course of this month, because they only give me 30 days of metrics. That doesn't even register. That doesn't even register anywhere, right? It just shows you the immense scale of open source, where like when someone's like, oh no, a 600 meg ISO, you build it every day? Geez, are they going to call you? I was like, no, they're not going to call me. The GitHubbers I have talked to about it think it's great though. Like, because we're using it in a way that wasn't like, who knew that you could just run your entire computer just right out of there, right? So just that's pretty cool.
Briefly explain
and
what
I
you're
applied for a beta program for open source stuff, get us nicer builders.
So can you just briefly explain for people who are like not super involved in that side, like what you're actually doing with GitHub here?
Yeah, so what we do is we keep all of the container files and all of that stuff in Git. So we say, take normal Fedora Silverblue and then make these changes, right? And that happens over a bunch of repos, but that's not important right now. And then in GitHub, there are things called actions, right? And what that does is says, every day I want you to build this OS, sign it, and then shove it into the GitHub package registry, which is when you type that rebase command on your terminal, you're saying, I want to get the image from GitHub. And that happens every 24 hours. We timed it so the main images build an hour after Fedora does, and then the NVIDIA image build an hour after that, because that compose, you're building on top of the other thing. We're not remaking the NVIDIA ones from scratch. We're saying, use the stuff we already did, and then just add the NVIDIA drivers on top.
Right.
That way, when a new game controller comes out and you have that udev rule, we stick that way earlier in the process, and that day everything just gets it, right? All the way down.
Yeah,
that's dope.
Yeah, one of the cool things that I did see with uBlue is like the way that your like image infrastructure works, where you have like the main, so you have the Fedora stuff at the top, and then your main image, and that like branches out. I'll see if I can find. Do you remember where on the website it is?
Yeah, if you go to the website and in the search, just type architecture.
Yes.
This was an important thing for me. You got to have that full text search on your website, folks, when you start an open source project. Tip number 1.
If I can spell, text search is not going to help with that. There we go. Okay, now we got it.
Yeah.
So you've got your upstream Fedora images where everything is like all the hard stuff is being done.
Right. Now, remember, Fedora does not consider these images final, right? They're not doing this until Fedora 39. So these aren't official upstream Fedora images. They are Fedora images run on Fedora's GitLab by the guy who works on the official Fedora stuff, but this is like his setup. So that's one of the reasons, like this cycle, even though it's basically ready, we call it beta, you know, because we're not building off the official image. And there's actually been some users that someone found that their printer worked on the official image, but not our image. And I was so confused because that shouldn't be. And then eventually we figured that out, you know, because I do know some people on the team, but we also wanted to figure out stuff on our own, unless we get really stuck, you know, and then we'll ask for help, because, you know, we need them to like do the hard stuff so that we can do our bling. So I just want to make sure that people understand, you know, the Fedora project does not officially endorse any of this, and we're playing, you know, we're playing in a sandbox. So yes, that's where we start.
So,
and then you want to move on to the next one? Or?
So, this takes us into the main images. So, what is uBlue? What to someone who has no idea what this project is, just let them know.
Yeah. We take all the annoying things in Fedora that they can't fix, and we fix those.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go to YouTube and you say like the most annoying things of Fedora, they're going to list a thing that we attempt to fix.
That's the important part.
Yeah. I mean, try it. Like, yeah. And then, so before main, there's actually another layer that we call config. And that's where we keep udev rules. That's why if you install the Steam Flatpak, you won't get the window that says Steam device is missing, because we just include that. Wooting keyboards we added, a bunch of stuff. And there's a whole repo by someone at Collabra. I think I don't know. Maybe I'd have to check on that. There's a person that I've trusted. I've seen their name before, that maintains a GitLab repo of like every udev rule for every game controller. So I was like, we got to have that. So we actually pull from that every day. But we do have a gate in there. So, if something bad gets in there, like we always kind of have to check before that gets automatic. It's in there. I can follow up in that. There's a few of them. I picked the person's name that I know.
I was trying to find the specific GitLab. The first one I find searching for is on Codeberg.
If you look in the container file in the config, it should be there.
Wait, maybe actually no, that might be a mirror of this. No, it is a mirror. Fabian.
Yeah, like I was confused. I was like, if someone knows what I'm supposed to be using, that one looks pretty good and maintained.
Fabian Bornschen? Sheen? Is that the same person?
No,
it doesn't matter. There's a bunch of.
I'll investigate. We'll look into that.
There's probably four.
And then that container is actually, it ends up being about 270 kilobytes.
Okay.
Of udev rules. But it's gold, those 270 kilobytes. And then the main repo is where we basically say, okay, we want to build 37, 38 of Silverblue, Kinoite.
I say it. I've never heard anyone say it. I don't know the correct way to say it. I just say it differently every time.
It's Kinoite because I used to have the same problem.
I fixed the problem by just saying it differently every time. So
exactly. Yes, I've gone through that. Ceresia, which I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's Sway. Because in Fedora, they have to have different names because that's what they decided to do.
Sure.
So they're just rolling with it. And then there's two that and then Voxite, which is XFCE.
Yep. Yeah.
And that one was
confused when I saw that.
Yeah. That one was done by someone who had been doing them on their own. I was like, hey, you want to join forces? And because it's easier when you share all the GitHub actions, right? And then actually Timothy from Fedora was like, hey, do you want to PR that into my more upstream thing? And then that way, when it's ready to go, that's less work because they're going to have to do one anyway, right? Yep. So I was like, cool. Maybe one of the things our project could do is be that kind of testing ground, for stuff like that, which is why I just finished Budgie last night. And I stayed up until like 4 a.m. to finish Budgie because Josh was like, it'd be pretty cool if you make one of these. I was like, man, you're right. So he is going to do it that way. But I busted out a uBlue image in like 3 hours just so like we could try it and play with it and rebase to it and all that kind of stuff. So, so Voxite started off as one of those. And then we have Alex Qt and Mate, which aren't in Fedora's, compose thing, and we're actually building those with OS tree, and those builds take probably 40 to 50 minutes to show you the difference between building something from scratch with OS tree, like how a distro does it, versus just like modifying a container, which is like way faster. Right? So but there's a reason that distros have to do it that way, because they have a whole bunch of stuff that they would get in trouble with that I don't get what they're doing, right? Like they have to have all that distro stuff. So then that's what we call the main images. So if you have an Intel or AMD GPU, this is what you want to roll. This is what you want to roll with. And there's very limited, there's some opinions that we take, but we try to keep them stock. There's a few things we change. Automatic updates have to be on by default. That's like the only hill I'll die on because the pipeline has to work. Like it just has to work. Plus you have the rollback and the resilience and reliability. it's once you get used to it, it's actually it's the way to go. And anything with hardware enablement that sucks. Like part of the reason I was telling you earlier before we started, I want to get that OBS camera loopback working because that's like AK mod. I want to get wireless Xbox controllers working, right? Because it doesn't take long. It's an out of tree thing you have to build, right? But we figured that out already. We just add more. So I want to do that.
I have an Xbox control here. I can't reach it. Whatever. I always use it wired.
You're right, because wired is just normal, right? That wireless thing is like that thing's a pain in the ass, right? But I was like, man, if we can do it, let's do it.
No, definitely be cool if it could be done. Yeah.
And then NVIDIA is the one that's after. Now this is actually it started off as 134 lines because on my blog post, my title was originally 134 lines of container file. Just save the Linux desktop, Yeah. Hey, I learned something from you YouTubers, man. You got to be a little bit, you got to be saucy.
Yeah.
You got to get attention. I got to compete with your Hawaiian shirts. It's not 134 lines now. That thing's a monster, man. But hey, better to have one place to do it. So what's cool about the NVIDIA thing is, so we build it for you, and then we have different streams. So we have what are the latest versions?
Before we go too far down that,
sure.
What were you missing that let you only have 134 lines initially?
I'd have to look.
Oh, okay.
Well, we weren't doing multiple versions. There were multiple things. Like, do we do RPM Fusion? There was another repo. We tried to, for a while, we were trying to just build it ourselves.
Right.
Because you could do anything you want in the container files or whatever. So, I mean, that wasn't me. That was the people with engineering. I'm fortunate because a lot of people that work on uBlue like do engineering as their job, right? So Josh works at Red Hat, Alex works at Amazon, Brian works at Amazon. But we have a lot of people who also don't work in the industry, so it's like a great mix of can we do this crazy stuff? I was like, oh man, I don't think that kid just realized what he's asking for. And then the next day someone's like, hey, I did this, and I was like, wow, that totally unlocks the possibility to do with that with that guy. I mean, you never know, right? And the thing is once you figure it, it's like, hey man, we just got to get the thing building and then we're good to go. Right. But then later it's like, well, if we totally redo it, then we'll be able to do multiple driver streams. And at first I was like, I don't know, man, don't you always kind of want to be on current? But actually around that time, Liam from Gaming on Linux tweeted, because he's on Fedora. He was like, my shit was working perfectly on Friday and it doesn't today. And I was like, dude, if you could rebase back to that image, I think I could help fix that. Right. Like, so we actually build all the supported NVIDIA ones. So if you want to go back to 470, hold on, let me see. We actually build so many versions of the tags that they don't show up in the display on GitHub. Like we have to figure that out, right? Because what we do is we tag everything with the major version,
right? The
version of the driver, right? And aliases for those. So if you always want to be on the current NVIDIA driver, you stay on 38-current, right? But it also has to have 38-570 or whatever the major release is. So if you want to stay locked to that, you can, right? Additionally, we put a date tag on it, right? So if you want to go back to what 470 looked like on Fedora 37 2 Thursdays ago, you could totally go there, right? See why this is cool?
Yeah.
This is cool? Yeah. So like, I was like, hey man, if we just have all the supported versions of all the stuff, and you could go back, it's like having a time machine, right? And the nice part is your apps and all that stuff is decoupled. That's why Flatpaks are key to this thing, right? Like a lot of people, we could have all of this. Why do we need sandboxing and blah, 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 blah. That's exactly why. It has to be a separate layer. That's that cloud native thing, man. You got to decompose. And
we'll eventually get to
it.
Layer
stuff, you could swap stuff out. And as long as the Lego holes and pegs are the same size, you don't care what brick is in there. Know what I'm saying? So like, yes, we can totally do that, but will it actually work in practice? That's why we've been taking our time, right? That's this entire, like we got this working actually a while ago, right? But you have to set people's expectations, right?
Yep.
And remember, our job is to make the pipeline resilient and make that work, right? If you were destined to get an NVIDIA Wayland bug that day, you're going to get an NVIDIA Wayland bug that day. I just make sure it got to you and you didn't break your package managed, or I mean, this is a lot bigger than me, you know, like the initial people were like 5 or 6 people. But they're cloud people, so they're very efficient. So we spent actually more time on the automation itself than the actual product. That's why the images are so kind of rough, right? They're not as like if you load Bluefin, like there's a lot of polish and stuff that you need. That's because we're concentrating on the, you know, like if you put Bluefin next to Vanilla OS any day of the week, like wallpapers are amazing. The workflow's nice. They know how to write GNOME apps. Ours is like, my friend Marco literally learned GTK in like a weekend. You know, and you can like,
yeah,
you know, because we're automation. We want to be the DevOps teams for a desktop, you know. So that's why we have all these images. And at some point, someone says, I want to take that. I'm going to make that the most awesome tiling window manager experience available. That's why we're making the toolkit part. So someone else can go that last, you know, because at that point, that's, we know what we got to do, right? Like our scope, we actually went back and we wrote this down. Important. If you ever start your own open source project, write down your scope and your mission. That way you don't get any bright ideas. And next thing you know,
this is
not just Linux desktop is our entire mission. Like, no,
this is not just an open source thing. This is also going back to that project I was mentioning earlier, where I was doing some stuff for the CSIRO. I was the lead dev and the project manager.
You don't want that.
And the client didn't know what they wanted. So make sure you set what your goals are, because it will get really bad if you don't. Yeah.
I mean, for sure, right? And like at some point, like we're getting enough people now. Like I'm looking forward to removing my access from the repos. Like I shouldn't be checking code like at all, you know. But luckily, it's cloud tech, so you can kind of understand a Docker file. I know enough Bash scripting, you know. And when there is something you don't know, that's why you have a community for, you know, like, hey, who knows Python? I do. Does this make sense? Cool. You're a maintainer now. What? Sorry. Be careful with that. Yeah. Like if you're like, I want to get into open source, you want to be good. You don't want to be too good, because then you get stuck maintaining something. You want to be a healthy driver.
And then 3 years later, you write a blog post being like, I hate all of these corporations stealing my code.
Yeah. Or if you're lucky, you get to work for one of them, which is cool. I've done both. You know, get yours. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring this cloud stuff kind of back. You know, irrespective of the economy today, is cloud developers just enjoy so much more professional and personal success. You know, generally speaking, than desktop people. I've worked with both sets. They're both brilliant, right? Open source is taking over the world. It kind of sucks, right? That like, if you really want to succeed as an open source developer, you kind of have to move to cloud or some place that is. They're fortunate people, right? Like, I'm sure some of you had, I want to run the desktop team at Red Hat. That sounds freaking cool, right? Like, you know, but when you look at the math and the numbers, right? It's like most people have to. That's where I'm actually running into more Debian developers than I ever have. So at cloud conferences, you know, but like, so, you know, in a way, having started off in Linux desktop, done the cloud thing, and I'm still doing the cloud thing, but kind of be more interested in the desktop is like, how do we break ourselves out of this loop, you know? So I'm like, well, I'm gonna, you know, I know this model works in cloud and mobile, so let's give it a shot, you know. And then like a lot of it is rough edges, and I get that, right? You know, at some point it becomes easier to fix the rough edges than to, like, no one should be using PP. Man, I was there when PPAs were made. Like, you don't want to be using those anymore. Please trust me.
So we got very sidetracked from.
Oh yeah. You can cut all that out. I don't know what your time.
No. I've got. We can. I don't know if I mentioned before. I just go wherever. The podcast is Tech Over Tea, but I've gone on rants about things that don't matter whatsoever. It's all, as long as it's entertaining. Are you
even drinking tea? I don't even see.
I've got an empty teacup here.
Okay,
and I've got some empty vodka cans here. But no, I'm not. I've got water.
Amazing.
Anyway, so we got to the NVIDIA images, and then under that, and then theoretically there could be other images, like
there could. The reason we put RockM there is like, what if someone wants this?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think we should sign up for that, but if someone shows up, absolutely.
If someone wants to maintain it,
yeah, that sounds great. And then after that, actually, we should change this. There's a separate repo called Starting Point, right? And that's where we want. Okay, so there's the images. That's cool. But you also have to have the kit, right? Because part of the reason I got annoyed by everyone saying, you can't customize immutable Linux distros. And
I've heard this a lot of times.
It's not the same thing, So I was like, fine, nerds, we'll have to make you a thing. So I can actually move on with my life. So we started this, and it's kind of more of a strip down, because Main and NVIDIA are doing complicated stuff. There's like a matrix of images to build, and generally speaking, you just want to take that thing, add the 3 or 4 things that you need, and then move on. So you clone that, and then that brings all the actions and all of that stuff over to your GitHub repo. You have to change the private key because we want you to sign your images. Otherwise, that won't work. And then you change, I want Emacs instead of Vim, or Micro instead of Vim, and then boom, you're publishing your own images. And there are people doing that now. It's just a matter of getting the docs into shape and better tooling, and like Cosine broke for a little while for people. We were trying to figure it out. So it's still kind of early days on that, but ideally, like Starting Point is going to be the thing that, all of that toolkit part is going to be the thing, or someone else is not going to be me. I'm hoping to be retired by then, that will go and actually take and actually make a cool, like I'm hoping someone makes a Cosmic one, because I did Budgie, so someone has to go make Cosmic, right?
That would be cool.
Yeah, and just do it. Like it's still relatively difficult for some people, but it is way easier than making your own distro, and you don't fall into the distro mistakes.
Yeah.
So
ever since I've been talking about things like Silverblue, like Kino White, like any of these other, I don't know how you feel about the term immutable distro, but we'll get into that in a bit, because I don't like the term immutable.
Yeah, actually, if you look on my website, we don't say it once.
Yeah, I did notice you tweet about that. But ever since I first started talking about this, I've had people in my comment section be like, these are bad because they're locked down. You can't customize them. Why would you ever want to go and use that? Why don't I just go and use Debian or something like that, or straight Fedora? But it is definitely, I think you could argue it's definitely harder to customize these images, but maybe you'd also say just different, because it's not the same way that you would do it on, like Arch or something.
Yeah, you're doing it at runtime instead of build time. That's why I explain that to people. Right. And I just say, look, pretend that you're doing all your customization, right? Remember when you very first started out, it's like, I've customized my George Ubuntu, right? Or whatever. And then there was that tool that would make an ISO out of it for you so that you could like do the thing. It's like that conceptually, except we're getting GitHub to do all the work, right? So when you're like, I'm ready for doing an upgrade, and your NVIDIA RPM Fusion thing breaks, or whatever third-party thing, or, I know Arch never breaks, but maybe in case you do an upgrade, Arch might break.
This morning.
Like this, sure. Pretend you're doing that. I just have GitHub doing. Here's what I tell the hardcore Linux nerds. Microsoft is doing this for me. I am costing them money. Right? That's the ultimate own right there. So you can do all the customization, the bandwidth, the builders, the CI testing. It's a great deal. I'm getting a great deal.
I didn't think like that.
Yeah, you could do that. It's just the tooling isn't like, it's way easier for you to like do it at runtime than to like set up a CI system. Like I get, like someone was like, you've made the Linux desktop as complicated as Kubernetes. A Kubernetes nerd actually turned, and I was like, yeah, dude. Yeah. However, it's also a tooling issue, right? Like uBlue is going to be the worst thing. Like this is the worst it's ever going to be. At some point, someone's going to make a thing, and you're going to put in Brody's cool thing. You're going to drop down, select your packages. You're going to click subscribe, and then you're going to paste that into your GUI thing, and you'll be done. Right? Like that's the potential that Fedora has made, right? It's just someone had to figure out how to make the tooling and how to explain it. And like at the time, like Linus broke his computer and everyone's flaming him for all the wrong reasons. And I was like, no, man, I'm going to have to build this stupid thing to tell people that the technology exists.
Mhm.
We have to get people there. And it's a good thing that the Steam Deck is immutable because people didn't know, and everyone who works in computers knew. Of course, that's going to be immutable. Like, no, what happened to you this morning? I don't want that happening on your Steam Deck. I don't care. Like the thing is, it's a function of money, right? Like we could QA every single package in Debian and Ubuntu, right? We'd have to charge you $5,000 per CPU to support that. Right. And some of you out there are paying your REL bills. You know how expensive it is to support a lot of that stuff, right? Like, engineering, we all know open source engineers, top tier in their profession, right? They cost money or you're going to lose them. So, we could do that, or we could try to find as many ways to automate the hell out of everything, right? And to remove as much jank and complexity on the client as we can, right? That's what so I've been doing a lot of research, and I'm fortunate that I know a lot of people. So I sat down with Tim Pepper, who he had worked on Clear Linux's update tool, swapd. That's how you pronounce that, by the way. And at the time, I was really into Clear Linux because they updated a lot, man. Like they were shredding it. And he was like, a lot of the design principles just make that client as stupid as possible, right? Its job is to ping a remote server, splat that thing on disk, do the least amount of math possible. I mean, I'm sure there's complicated stuff in there. Don't get me wrong, right? But a lot of that complexity, they shifted to the server side, right? And that way it kind of solves it for everyone. And then you just splat the thing as fast and as dumb as possible to the client, right? Like when you're apt installing something or DNS, whatever package manager you have, more than likely it's taking all the stuff that you've added, all the PPA, and it's trying to do the math to make your computer boot that day, right? And sometimes the bear just gets you, right? Like, now this also does not lead to total resilience. It removes a lot of the jank, right? But someone was like, this thing is stupid. I sudoed myself to root and I RMF'd my root partition. This is stupid. You said this was reliable. I was like, dude, you're still an administrator. My main man, you're still an administrator.
It's still going to protect you from being dumb.
Yeah. Like it simplifies your backups a lot, but you still got to do them. Like I back up my Etsy still, but I don't really back up anything else on it's reproducible data. So, it's a one download. And then my home directories, I use Deja Dupe, although there's another Pika backup, I guess. What you tell me, what are the kids using these days?
I don't know what the kids are using. I am really bad at data backups.
Backup episode. That would be cool.
I am so bad at doing data backups. I literally did a video a couple months back where I lost like a week of videos because my hard drive was failing. It started deleting things.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I just copy things from one drive to another.
Yeah. I mean, I have everything in Cloud or in GitHub.
I absolutely should do way better than what I do. Yeah.
There's a saying. Here's another cloud native saying. You ready? I don't have time to automate that. But then if you actually think about it in your head, all you're doing is like wasting time. You know?
Yeah.
That's not meant as a dunk. That's just like something to think about. That's part of the, sometimes people are like, well, RPM, this is my favorite one, is RPM OS tree is slow, right? It's like, if you're using RPM OS tree interactively, yes, it's slow because it's like Git for your entire file system. Like it's doing stuff, it's doing math, right? But I think RPM OS tree is fast, right? Because when someone says, I want to add controller support for this thing, and I hit accept in GitHub, 10 minutes later, they reboot their computer and they have it. That is fast to me, right? It's just a different model though, right? So the way I try to encourage people, they're like, well, I find myself layering all the time, or the same thing with vanilla or whatever thing you're using. It's such a pain in the ass to put things in root or whatever. What I try to tell them is like, pause for a second, try to have a think, and like, how do I remove this from my life? Oh, well, if I find myself adding this to every computer, where does this belong? in Git, the single source of truth, right? So if you think about it, if I RPM OS tree Emacs on this thing, it's slow and whatever. But if I do it in Git, it does in 10 minutes. And let's not forget, all of the machines in this house are also fixed. So you add up 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. This is how automation cloud nerds think about everything. Like if you think I'm the extreme one, the actual engineers, like they will work on a thing for 8 hours a day for 2 weeks if it saves someone a minute in a build time. Because when everybody thinks like that, you have to think long term. That's also something, some advice for some people who don't understand, or maybe in the comments are confused. They're like, well, what's wrong with my system the way I have it today, right? So first of all, if your system's running great and you're a good system administrator, thumbs up, not taking your thing away, right? But also, you have to recognize that sometimes configuration drift happens, if I fresh installed 2204 today and your perfectly upgraded system from 1004, they're not going to be the same.
No.
Right. And we kind of know that. So we try to think of things as long-term. I always found it strange. We were writing down our values, so we just added it, the long-term maintenance of this thing is what we care about, right? I plan on never reinstalling on any of my machines ever again. They're just going to have it because of that model. And it's and I would tell people, if you're thinking about it long-term and whatever you're doing with now, if you can put up with it, flat pack overrides, God, what a pain in the ass, man. You get a new drive and you put it in, and then you're like, why is it not showing up in my Steam thing, right? So the way I think about it is when you get a new drive, you do what we call day zero stuff, right? Which is I put it in my FS tab, or if you're elite, you make a system demount unit because you want a separate file for each drive. Trust me on that. Right? That flat pack override just becomes another step in that checklist on I bought a new drive and I need to add it to Linux, right? And then you add it there, and then you never have to worry about it again. It's difficult for new users who are switching to this that have never had to do that before, right? Because they're like, oh man, first of all, it really sucks unless you don't, it's really hard to figure out what's happening there. Which is why we try to document it, but there's only so much you can do. So what I like to think about it is, hey, look, we're kind of saving you from the long-term thing, because whatever the portal thing that's supposed to make that magically work is not done yet. What I do want to do is get you on a thing and get you mostly working enough. And then you're Linux users, you can suck it, you can suck it up for a little bit and figure out flat pack overrides and flat seal. But that also means in 2 years, when that thing is ready, it's just going to show up one day, and you don't have to reinstall. And when MVK is ready and you're on an NVIDIA image, you'll be able to rebase, hopefully. It's all beta stuff still, but all testing we've seen so far just shows, and it'll get even more reliable once you have that unified kernel image, and there's some bootsy stuff happening that I can't explain right now, but it's well, you kind of take your licks in the beginning, right? You just spend more time figuring it out, but once you get it, and by now Silverblue and Kinote have been around long enough where people are starting to understand, you have to go through a distribution upgrade to really understand that the machine that day, the reboot and the upgrade was actually the same. The machine doesn't care, right? You give me stuff, I put it on disk. It was 37 yesterday, it's 38 today. There's no in-place upgrade. You don't sit there watching packages upgrade individually. GitHub did that for you. There's no spinner. I haven't seen that thing. There is no spinner on systems like this. My phone doesn't even do that, and it has basically conceptually the same kind of system. It doesn't care, right? It's every single day I'm getting a fresh OS. It's like that fresh feeling every single day. There's no configuration drift. And that I think is appealing to people. I just think some people, they get caught up around but I read someone was like, I read you can't change your host name on these things. I was like, come on, man.
What?
So for me, it's all about, okay, yeah, I get it. I'm a Linux nerd too. I want, because for me, this allows me to experiment with stuff. I've never tried Budgie before, for example, because I don't like to do things in VM. I like to experience it the way it was intended with my graphical stuff, right? And you gotta install the distro, and if it's a normal one, then you gotta install this, and now you have two separate desktops.
It's worse if you're installing it on the same distro, because now you have this mix and match of distro packages, desktop packages. Yeah.
So I could never try KDE, because in Ubuntu, for the longest time, if you install Kubuntu, and then you went back into GNOME, like the folder icons were KDE's colors, or like it would have little things like that back and forth, right? But then one thing, especially once, I used to be a lot like your commenters, right? Where I was like, I was there every day. You're supposed to break your computer.
No, I was as well.
The second you start getting paid to work on this stuff, like you ain't got time. You ain't got time. Like I would always wonder this, because people would argue about the default wallpaper for Ubuntu, right? And it was like these community ones and all that kind of stuff, and people would argue about the different wallpapers that should be included and shouldn't be included. But you go anywhere, every time you see a picture, especially when it fails on a kiosk or whatever, it's always the same default wallpaper.
Yeah.
I tell people, I was like, you think sometimes where people are like, Linux is about choice, right? And I was like, if you think people are changing default wallpapers, I've got news for you. But people do it. It's just that small, but you have to keep those people happy, right? Because they're the experienced ones that are like actually the ones out there installing it for friends and helping them out and stuff.
Yeah.
So you want to serve that audience, right? But you also have to understand that you're making a thing that's supposed to be for everybody, right? And at some point, you have to say the flex isn't that you're being limited. I layer stuff on some of my personal systems because Bluefin is a default image, right? I'm not going to add Vert Manager to it, even though it did have it for a while, because it brings in all this stuff nobody wants.
Yeah.
So fine. Sorry, I get rambly.
No, that's totally fine. Absolutely fine with me.
What were you talking about?
I don't know. That went on for like 20 minutes.
This happens to me a lot.
Well, I guess we can jump back to one thing we skipped over, which is immutability.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
I've spoken to, I believe the maintainer of Vanilla OS has a problem with the term. A bunch of immutable distro maintainers have a problem with the term immutable distro.
Right.
You're not really, you don't call uBlue a distro, but even so, you're still working in this immutable distro space.
Yeah, it definitely competes with distros.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah.
What do you think of the term immutable? And if you don't like the term, do you think there's something better that could, fit in that place?
I use image based. The person that Colin Walters, one of the authors of RPM OS tree, how this happened is I had known him for a long time. This is a cool story, so I have to tell it. And he was a Debian maintainer a very long time ago. And I was a Debian and Ubuntu user or whatever. So he had been an Ubuntu maintainer indirectly. I think he had a few uploads. I'm not sure, but he was a Debian maintainer. And then he ended up at some point working for Red Hat and then Fedora CoreOS and stuff eventually. So he's in that 2 comma club that's like, Ubuntu, Debian, and Fedora, right? Like there's very few people in that club, right? Open source is large, right? But it's not that large. There are people who've worked for all the distros, right? That's why users tend to think of it as a competition. And when you flame when my friends work, even though they work for another company, like we get kind of upset about it, right? That's why I'm allowed to flame Canonical, but you're not. So what was I saying? This past October, he was coming to his first KubeCon, the Kubernetes conference, which was in Detroit because I live in Ann Arbor. And we went to breakfast, and I had started using Silverblue, and I had uBlue, right?
Yep.
But it was like the crappy one. I didn't know about this OCI thing or whatever, and I always thought, this is the best it's gonna be, whatever, it works for me, And I sat there, and he had sent me some spec 9 months before, and I just didn't understand any of it, But what that was is the thing that helps us. That's the booting off the OCI container thing. That's like literally the thing that started this project. And so we sat there and he's explaining all this to me, and I'm just like mind blown. I don't think I even ate my omelet. I just like listened to him or whatever. And so he's explaining to it at the very end. I was like, oh, I can't wait to redo my Ubuntu image. I used to call it Ubuntu. But once it started working, I was like, someone's going to want to use this. I know this. So I can't call it Ubuntu. So I renamed it to Bluefin, which is the name of the office building, Canonical's office building in London. So I had to, all my stuff has to have little Easter eggs because open source, that's what it's about. And Bluefin's like a cool name. You know?
It is.
Blue, silver blue. The domain's expensive. I know because I'm trying to get it. And then I was like, man, I'm going to redo my thing. I was like, hey, Colin, if you're just serving things out of a registry and all you need is Podman, you don't think I can build and host this whole thing on GitHub, do you? And he leaned over and all my machines have been like this for the past 2 months. And as soon as he left, I went back to my booth duty or whatever. And in my brain, I was figuring out how I'm going to do this. And then later that weekend, I hung out with my friends, Marco Ceppi. Him and I started Ask Ubuntu together. One of the cooler projects I helped work on. And Wayne Witzel, and we kind of planned it out. They kind of conceptually told me what to do. And then I went on Fedora Discord, said, hey, I think this might work. Right. So he has a paper, roundabout way to answer your question. He has a paper on terms, but he's like a nerd, man. So like his term is anti-hysteresis systems.
Oh no, I have read this.
Yeah. So that paper, if you look at there's a list called awesome-immutable. That's how I started. Actually, I was like, look, I'm not smart enough to make any of this, but at least I can write stuff down because I know Richard Brown as well. I got stuck. So this all ties in back to Kubernetes. 2 years ago, I got stuck in the back of a bus going to the Kubernetes party. And we were just in the back of the bus and he's explaining all of this stuff to me because he's like kind of the god. He's been preaching about this stuff for so long that people forget.
Immutable, reprovisionable anti-hysteresis.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little heady on that.
It is fully managed, image-based, reprovisionable, and has anti-hysteresis properties and links to a Wikipedia article about hysteresis because nobody reading this knows what the word
and if you
means.
keep digging, you end up in distributed systems papers and it's all sorts of game. I ended up on game theory today. I've had some Wikipedia spelunking, but geez, I'm just trying to get my host name changed on my immutable system. How did I end up here? So he goes with image-based sounds good to me.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Because for a few reasons, especially with this method specifically, is it's a container image, right? Like that is a common term that people understand. So when I go back to people that don't even run Linux desktops and I say, yeah, we boot off a Docker image, they kind of know exactly what we're talking about. They go directly to, cool, I didn't know people were doing that. Marco hasn't run a Linux desktop in 8 years or something, right? But he was able to work on a lot of the stuff in uBlue because same stuff, and that's part of that economic argument that I'm trying to make, right? The more your Linux desktop looks like just another generic cloud payload, what does payload need? Graphics, network, storage, same as everything else. There's special cases there, right? Which is why it took so long to get here, but now once it's here, if you're sharing, think about how sucky it is when your favorite distro has a mirror problem because they have to go around to universities and be like, hey, can you set up a rsync mirror for me? It's got to be a 2-phaser, at least 24 hours a day. If you can find anyone running their infrastructure on that fat pipe, that's why it's always universities. Check it out next time. There's a reason for that, right? But registries are some of the most important infrastructure in computing right now, right? You are definitely closer to a GitHub mirror, which is in Azure, than probably a lot of the distros you try, right? Because there's financial incentive for all of those registry. Even if it's Linode or whatever, one of the smaller ones, right? They want to be fast, so they have regional stuff. They don't have to set up anything special to help your distro out, right? It's just another container that gets hosted on a thing and, whatever. So I like that commonality of it. That's why, image base is cool, but this other part about the cloud native, I am purposely inserting that. There's in case you can't tell, I have a motive, I have an agenda, right? And my agenda is to make the Linux desktop payload to be the same as a cloud payload. Because for a lot of now that I've been around the block, I understand the economics, right? I saw layoffs at Canonical. Same thing, right? If System 76 has to, readjust, or SUSE, or any one of these companies that make stuff, the stuff that all of you're flaming in the YouTube comments, at the end of the day, open source code is open source code, and we want as much of that as possible, right? We want that competition. We want that. That's why I tell people, they're like, would you please tell me what's better, OS tree or OpenSUSE's micro OS, right? Hey, that's up to you. Obviously I prefer the OS tree approach, but I'm a container nerd, so I'm biased. Right. But to me, I tell people, don't focus on that part. I think that's the video you made, over rotating on immutability. That's the video that you made. I just remember.
That sounds like a bit. Yeah. Look.
Yeah.
I've said this before. I've made too many videos. People remind me about things I said. Like, yeah, that sounds like something I said.
Crank them out, man. You crank them out. Yeah. I put out little ones in my channel explaining it's basically this all the time. And I do them in one take because I don't like to video edit. That's why there's and well, you can see it now. I just spurt out stuff. It doesn't matter.
But yeah, I'm the same though. Like I don't do it in one take. I do cut things because I do speak. The way I speak in the podcast is usually the way I speak in a video. So it goes like down some tangent. Like, wait, no, that's nonsense. Get rid of that. Cut it. Because I have notes. I usually will note. I don't do a full script, like note out the entire video, get the dot points in. But when I go to record, sometimes I realize the ordering of things makes no sense. I'm like, wait, no, take this thing, put it here, put this here, put this here. So it takes me, I would say usually about an hour to record a video, I would say. Yeah, something like that.
Do you write scripts?
Hmm?
Do you write scripts?
Yeah, it's noted out. That I do that while I'm doing my research, but the actual recording part for each video is about an hour. For a 15-minute video, it takes me an hour to record.
Because you got pretty much a uBlue right away. My concern, because I've been mailing all the YouTubers. I was like, Jay, hook me up.
It's not really got much coverage in YouTube, has it?
No, it hasn't. That's actually something we should talk about, because so many people are sleeping on this technology. First of all, remember, I didn't invent any of this, right? Like as you can see, if you look in there's people if you look in the Git logs.
Wait, am I the only one besides you that's talked about it?
More sophisticated. But it does fly under the radar, right? Especially, it's interesting for Fedora. So I have I'm hoping to give a talk at a Fedora conference at some point, of lots of cool places where we want to help each other out, that kind of thing. And, in a lot of ways, if Fedora were to do this right now and you had your little website and stuff, people would be like, cool, I don't get it. Immutable systems suck, blah, 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 right? But if you've been struggling with an NVIDIA driver, right, maybe a Flatpak override might not be as bad, and like I said, long term, right? I know there's people I know that will probably never switch. I know Popey probably won't ever switch, right? Because at first I started, I was like, Alan, I'm gonna change you over. But at some point you're like, well, I can't do any worse. We're already sitting at a single digit percentage. So someone else think of an idea better, or give me a bunch of money like Valve has, and then maybe someone will figure something out. But so yeah, in a lot of ways we had to do what Fedora couldn't do. And we know, because you don't want to compete with Fedora either. No. If it was just better Fedora, it's just there's nothing worse than a distro that takes high quality stuff and then breaks it. Which technically we're doing, but we're also ensuring that we have that separation, and we're putting a lot of careful thought into it, but of course software bugs are going to happen, right? What we don't want is to flood Fedora's bug tracker with a bunch of people running custom crazy stuff or whatever. So we're purposely figuring out ways, and I have a page, how to figure out how to report a thing to Fedora. And, in a lot of cases, I prefer to run interference for you,
right?
So that we can figure that out. And once we do that a few thousand times, then we can hopefully not 1,000 times, but like, for example, with making the budgie thing, right? Like we can't have 10 people flooding Fedora at once trying to get their stuff in, right? But if you figure out the first one, and then Timothy wrote it, he actually wrote the steps, right? Because an automation engineer told me this once. There's like, when you get a new piece of technology, you do 3 things. First time, you build it from source. You spend as much time as you need. You get that thing, you figure out that build system backwards and forwards, whatever. The second time is a more nuanced approach where you're figuring out the real hard problems with that technology. And by the third time, it better be automated. Right. And that's something I've carried with me, so like he already had all the steps, right? So it took me about 3 or 4 hours to make budgie, the budgie image, budgie, obviously. And the next one better be an hour or less, right? Because we found all the little things and we fixed the bugs and we did the thing, right? Because some people are like, you should go invite every desktop in Linux to go make one of these, right? Of course I want that, like, duh. But it can't be a show of the worst kind. So sometimes you gotta, Marco reminds me of this constantly. He's like, take off your foot off the gas, let the situation develop a little bit, let the tools mature.
Yeah, you don't want to take on too much too quickly, especially with early tooling.
Yeah. But we're also stubbing out open source project maintenance tip number 36 or whatever. So you want to stub out stuff. So even if you don't do anything, you leave a thing there that says read me. It'd be amazing if someone would fix this. I would do it this way. And then you put like 5 things. And then you come back later and someone's like, hey, I tried it. And then they PR. That's how the ISO generator got built. We didn't make ISOs. Right. Yeah. You had to install Fedora and rebase to it. And that sucks. It's cool, but it's not going to win you any points on the adoption category.
Well, that was when you had the ISO come out. That's when like stuff really started like picking up, didn't it?
Yeah, we're about to hit 2,000 downloads on the ISO.
Jeez.
And the polls are well over 150,000 by now. Those are like a bad cloud nerd. We didn't get our charts up in time compared to when the thing is. So I can't show you a graph, but eventually we will have, because I want to make everything public. It annoys me that you can't see how many downloads the Firefox Snap has.
Yep.
That sucks.
Yeah.
I don't like that, Can we can do that on Flat? Do we do that on FlatHub for Firefox? Because I know the binary sits on there.
We definitely do. The new website's live.
Yeah, it is nice.
At least it was there yesterday, unless someone broke something overnight.
Here you go. Installs over time.
Firefox.
8,674.
In the past day, 8,674 past day, yes.
Yeah.
It's a couple of...
What happened in December? Is that spike?
Yeah.
See, that's the kind of stuff nerds me out.
Yeah, what happened December? Wait, let me just go check another package.
I wonder if
Chrome.
That's the day they announced it was official. No, because it's been official for a long time.
No,
now.
Chrome has the same thing around the same time. What's another popular package? Kdenlive.
OBS.
No, Kdenlive doesn't have a spike
OBS
there.
can't be as pop.
No, the spike exists there on Firefox.
Spotify.
It exists there on Firefox and Chrome. It's not there on Spotify. What the hell happened on that? What?
Maybe something got fixed on the back end and it was an adjustment. I don't know.
Huh.
If someone knows, leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people there's a bunch of people that watch this that I know are like more involved in the dev side of
Skelly.
Yeah, Skelly.
Skelly, if you're listening.
Tell me what happened. I got no idea. That's really weird because it'd be weird if it was just like it was just one project. Like that's fine. Maybe something weird happened. But the fact that it's both major browsers.
Yeah. So I want to put all our metrics and stuff. Like you can go in the actions. You can actually watch it build and you can do all that. But I want to show growth. I want to have a little competition graph, the leaderboard that will show. Because right now, Kinoite. Kinoite by far is our. And has always been the second it came out,
okay,
has always been. It passed Silverblue.
Way. That's curious.
I have many theories about this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do know KDE people use it. So Timothy, the person I've been talking about, CoreOS, is involved in like the KDE team,
Right.
So, there's a chance he might have said, hey, check this out in a KDE channel. And I didn't know, that's what I choose to believe, but I also have other theories. Like, if you have an NVIDIA machine and you see how cool the Steam Deck is, this is pretty much the model. It's different, right? It's a flat pack theme or whatever, but it's a pretty close approximation that you can get, right? And the same tools that you can get on your Steam Deck. It's interesting because people were like, look at all the cool stuff that you'll be able to run on your Steam Deck, because it comes with FlatHub enabled, right? But it's also awesome because now on all my desktops, all that stuff like Proton Up, we know that thing is solid. All the emulator stuff just works. There's the occasional thing. Like, it's really nice that GameScope just works out of the box on the deck, and on my desktop you got to do stuff, and that sucks. But generally speaking, it's also nice because when people target Steam Deck, I get that on my Linux desktop. And it's interesting because we always talk about the other way, right? Because someone's going to run LibreOffice on their Steam Deck, and it'll be a cool thing. Right, like we knew people were going to do that.
To be fair, there are people that are using their Steam Deck as like their actual computer, which is so crazy to me.
For them. Yeah, it's a powerful little machine. Yeah, like if like my dad, if he needed a computer, I could hook it up with a dock behind his monitor, and he probably wouldn't. He probably wouldn't tell, right? Because he's kind of used his junky Windows machine because he's a dad, so he's installing all the stuff, right? So yeah, Steam Deck is going to be way more powerful than his $2,000 computer. Yeah, that's why immutability is the future. See, that was a real example, because that stuff happens all the time.
One thing one thing you've mentioned a lot of times is cloud native, but we're not actually defined the term yet.
It's literally just these tentative ideas, right? Cloud native is software. How do I do this without going in the weeds? So when cloud came out, I'll actually tell you exactly what I said when I heard Amazon. So Amazon Web Services is considered kind of the big one that started this, right? In 2008. And Ubuntu contributor, by the way, named Eric Hammond, did the first EC2 images for Ubuntu. And that's why, and when you're on cloud, Ubuntu is everywhere, like the cloud images. And that's why when people try to like, do you think people are going to stop using Ubuntu? I was like, no. That was done by a contributor, Eric Hammond. Eric Hammond is the one that, and of course others, but Eric Hammond was the one who kind of like led that charge. And that was really awesome. But back then it was like, hey, wait a minute. This is just a Linode with an API on top of it. What's the big deal? Because I'm SSHing into servers still. I have no idea, right? What happened is once people realized they had an API, and of course the first cuts were like, they were very primitive, and now there's like 75 billion Amazon services, right? Like back then you didn't have the database, you didn't have the load balance, like it was just like compute only, it was like very raw, but people caught on to that API driven approach, right? The second one would be self-service. Right. So if you're at a company and you say, boss, I need a server, right? You like fill out a form, maybe 3 months later, you'll get a server or whatever. Here, any department manager with a credit card can get infrastructure, right? And when you need to scale, you just click, as long as the credit card works. That's where the term shadow IT comes from, because what happened is a bunch of people are like, internal IT sucks. Let's just whatever. And then the CIOs are like, wait a minute, our entire company's running off of everyone's expense credit cards. And like, we got to figure that out. And that's a process the entire industry went through. And I'm sure it's a problem for people today. But that kind of self-service approach, like you want software right now. And no matter how awesome you are, you can't rack faster than Amazon can turn on a server. So there's that approach. And then the cloud, the kind of API driven self-service. There's probably a lot of other fundamentals, but let me just talk about those two, because that'll make the point, and then someone else can correct me or fill me in later. Is applications need to be used to that model, right? So the example I like to use when I say cloud native is back then, if your application, if the database changed its IP address, your application would stop working.
Right.
And some of you are like, that still happens to me at work, right? And you have what people would say copying and pasting your problems into cloud. You would grab your VMware VM and you would just shove it in Amazon, right? And then you would say, why is this so expensive? Cloud is stupid. People still say that. Sure, man. However, the people that started looking at the API-driven stuff said, hey, look, if we write the applications to be, this is kind of where microservices came into, right? And so instead of one app that does stuff, apps should not care whether the IP address changed underneath them or not, right? So what does that mean? DNS has to be solid, right? That's why at the end of the day, it's always DNS that breaks everything. That's a joke, but also true. It's just things could break way worse in addition to DNS breaking. So what happened is people started to figure out how to scale and take advantage of Amazon in a way that was very horizontally scalable, right? So instead, if your front end now is like smart enough to be able to dynamically do all the stuff that it needs to do with the cache and data, all that stuff, all of a sudden you can go from 1 to 1,000 of them, right? And reasonably, as long as this architecture occurred, this is all okay. I'm oversimplifying a lot of things here, but like assuming you're doing all the stuff, right? That's how like you can't make Netflix. Like Netflix, if with a traditional server model, you can make Netflix, but it would have been expensive, right? Netflix was born out of Amazon, that kind of model, right? And then of course, once everyone figured it out, everyone's like, oh, that's the way to go. It's kind of this like everything is split now. So Google, Microsoft, everybody has a thing now that's, and that was like the first wave of cloud native. The second wave was Docker, right? Where they put a pretty UX on it, right? You've been able to do containers before, LexC, BSD people have been talking about jails for how long, right? But Docker gave it that UX, and importantly, it gave it that UX for front-end people who write the apps, right? Because they're the ones that need that, right? It became so hard that literally it was like, well, it works on my computer. Someone was like, we have to make that problem has to go away or it's not going to work, right? So that's why when people joke, a container is literally everybody else's computer. Yeah, that's the best we got right now. So you ship that and then you try to slim that down as much as possible, right? Which is why container images are getting really, really small now, right? But it's still possible. Someone out there, I don't know if you've seen a Windows container. They are not small. So like it's like you can make. We're shipping a whole operating system in the thing, right? So that second wave is that container right now becomes orchestrating these containers and them talking to each other. So then they need logical groupings and it needs to be an abstraction layer above the cloud, right? And then, so that unlocks a bunch of stuff, but also makes things complicated. Like Kubernetes is as simple as it can be. So this kind of dynamicness, right? Your app, your database might not be there when you ping it next time. Your app has to account for that, and it never did. They would just error out, right? So apps you had to build in that resilience, right? They had to kind of be self and independent. And there's more technical terms for this. They're way smarter people than me, by the way, that explain it. I'm trying to understand it, the way I figured it out, as that relates to the desktop, right? So that kind of dynamicness, right? And the declarative config is another one, right? I have a file that says my computer should look like this.
Yeah.
And then something else goes and tries it. And then the next day it does it again. If something is missing, it adds it, right? If something extra is there, it takes it away, right? And its entire job is to normalize that system. And that's literally what RPM-OS tree when run in CI, similar to uBlue, because other people are going to do it. I hope other people do it, right? Is you are saying, I want my desktop to look like this, right? And you are going to build it from scratch every day. So, because I want the updates from Fedora, that's important, right? You can't gate updates. That's why distros that are like, it's like Arch, but we wait a week. Like that doesn't. And I get why you do that, because you right, you have to hire people to do that correctly. That's hard, man. Like, Valve is doing it, and as you can tell, that doesn't look easy to me.
No. And they're doing it image based, so they've at least got that advantage.
Yeah, exactly. Like sometimes I wish I could see what that dashboard looks like, how broken it is every day, and then when it's green, are they like rebase today? Like I want to know that so bad. So yeah, that kind of model, right? And then I talked a little bit about the economics and things like that, and these were just things that I had learned because a lot of the people. So I've been shopping around this idea a lot, and Colin is an old GNOME guy too, and he's like, "Oh man, yeah, you're right. This would apply to the desktop." And I would go and ask people, they're like, what do you think? Right. And then the smart ones get it. The ones that have been around in automation get it because they're like, labs. Remember how much it sucks to run labs at universities? Because I've done that job and it sucks, right? Like OEMs, think about it. If you had a ThinkPad image for your ThinkPad, right? And there was one issue that they had that they couldn't get in Fedora on time, or it's not in the kernel or whatever, right? Like my first Dell Sputnik came with a PPA enabled on it. No. What if that came with an image, right? That had gone through that QA process and you have it, right? And then someday it just gets upgraded to the official thing a little bit after it gets to the kernel. And some smart engineer who's made his whole career on testing stuff, her career on testing stuff, can let me know when it's safe to put it on my laptop kind of thing. Can you imagine if you reported a bug and the developer, can you imagine if there was a GNOME VRR image attached to that PR this entire time? Wouldn't that be cool? I bet you get a lot more testing because you could just reboot into it. And then when you're like, oh no, this is kind of janky on this one game, you could switch back. None of this exists, by the way, but it's totally possible. And of course, everyone's been talking about it because cloud has been doing this for a very long time already. That's why I'm talking about those economics, right? If this kind of workflow can save Lenovo, whatever, a tiny percentage, System 76, a tiny percentage, right? That's why I want to accelerate this. Fedora's like, we think we can do this in 5 years. I was like, 5 years? That's an entire Star Wars trilogy. I'm not waiting. Yeah, I am not waiting for that. So that's why I grabbed my friends. I was like, you know what? If we could solve NVIDIA, there are people who literally will quit Linux because of NVIDIA, right? And I was like, I tell you what, if people are quitting because of that, and instead they flame Flatpaks instead, or they get called the noob because they don't know how to arch. Okay, sounds good to me. So that's kind of what we're doing, and I think what's important, what's different about this is I've gone through this for so long. I've seen Unity's greatest day and worst day ever. I've seen Debian at its best. Debian the day that OpenSSH key thing happened and everyone was like really, really sad. And sometimes the bear gets you, right? But man, what if we could avoid a lot of it? We can invest in the automation. And that's why I'm really glad that we have people who do this as their job, professional people helping me on this. Because if it was just me doing it, the quality, it would not be good. I say this, the worst image is probably better than most distros people are running today. The people running the small distros, but that's also not true because I can mess up some stuff. But there's a reasonable chance that like it can be better, but it has to pass the technical muster. Right. And even though the technology this is based on is amazing, right? Like, that's why we turn on things. You have to have an approval for merger. That's why I wrote open source governance. Like, who does that for fun? This guy.
I'm sure there's someone.
Like, you have to earn that trust, and you have to, it's just not enough to say Josh works at Red Hat. Cool. I don't think if he works on the CoreOS parts, I think he works on something totally different. So I don't know. Like we could say that. We could say brought to you by, because the people use Nobara because they're like, that guy works at Red Hat. He must be pretty good. And I agree. Yeah,
well, people use Nobara because they know the name. Why is that?
Yeah, and he has a proven track record.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't. So that's kind of like why I've been kind of very passionate about getting the word out, because I hear you. We see the things where say I don't like one distros run by one person because there's all these things. So now we know. Okay, all right. Like I filled out the thing on GitHub. If I die, where the repos go to.
Mm-hmm,
It's kind of dark. You have to go in there and say, if I pass away, and I'm looking at ways for us to have escrow of the secrets and all the kind of stuff that you expect in a professionally run cloud product, because I've done that for a long time, right? So if I can bring a little bit of that, of how Kubernetes is run to this open source project and show people that we mean it, and that way, when you make a mistake, right? If you see someone make a mistake and then they write a post-mortem on it, right? You know that they're taking that knowledge to good use.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So like, people are going to make mistakes, and I think it's important that those are documented, right? But then you also have set expectations of, I expect you to not put yourself in a position to do this, right? So we got to be we're very careful about infrastructure that we spin up, right? Like, sure, we have a GitHub dependency, but if GitHub goes down, a lot of projects more important than us are affected. So cool. But like setting up our own infrastructure, all of that kind of stuff, I'm very hesitant to do, and we'll do it at the last minute. But that long-term thinking is what we're thinking about. Theoretically, we only have to make 2 changes every 6 months, and that's add the new version of Fedora and remove the unmaintained version of Fedora every 6 months. The people that maintain in the NVIDIA repo signed up for that mess. So good luck, Josh and Alex. Right? Because they have to, right? NVIDIA comes out. All the users come in. When do I get this? Right? That's like the first open source thing. Right? We're waiting for RPM Fusion because it's easier to eventually work there than to do it yourself from scratch. Right? So you have to wait for them, and then we enable it. And we're always building. With Fedora 38, it's easier because that's open source. So you're always building it whether people use it or not. And if it's broken for 3 days, we didn't care as much, right? Because it eventually fixes itself, because your client never sees the broken image. That's awesome. Yeah. So, but when the NVIDIA drivers work, it was coming up to release, and NVIDIA still wasn't building on Fedora 38. And our image was getting old, and I was like, man, we got to get the security updates in, and you know what? They're gonna have to stay on the old version. Let's start writing this down because we know there's lessons to be learned here, that kind of thing. And after 38, RPM Fusion was still busted for NVIDIA for 2 or 3 days. But once it enabled it and everything went green, and we sat there hitting F5 just like everybody else. And we knew the exact repo, and it was empty, and we would hit F5 on it. I had notifications on my phone and stuff. And the minute it went, now what's cool is the automation would have ran it eventually.
Right.
So I just wanted to get it fixed as fast as possible. And then as soon as it went live, boom, all the builders were green, and we had automated generating ISOs. So we just clicked the button, we waited, and then boom, they were done. Now what we're hoping for is, at some point, figure out a way to work with the RPM Fusion people to keep more older versions in an archive, so that it would be nice to continue to build the older drivers for as long as possible. So if you're in that weird situation where you still need your security updates, right? But that latest version of the driver has a bug that's just killing your favorite game or something, right? And right now we can't offer that, right? If RPM Fusion doesn't hold a thing, we gotta drop support for it, and a lot of it is like best effort, the best we can do. Wouldn't it be great if you just had a stream of all the business? But we're not there right now. And I just saw the other day, someone got a game running on MVK, and it wasn't 3 frames a second. It was
I've
way
not
more
been paying
than
attention to MVK. Like I saw mentioned a while back. I just didn't really properly follow it. That's cool.
Yeah, I saw a picture from the HDR Hackfest too. That's happening.
The open source NVIDIA Vulkan drive MVK begins to run games.
It's definitely not that one. It's definitely been doing that for a while.
Okay, well, this is from January.
Oh, no. This was within the last month.
I didn't even realize it was that far along.
Yeah. Liam would know. Look on. Hold on. I'll know.
Games. Wait. This from Phoronix in March.
That sounds right.
David early today shared a video of running the game Talos Principle, which was the original Vulkan API launch title. Before getting too excited, it's running at a mere 13 FPS.
Yeah.
But it's running.
Yeah.
Which is good. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah. So at first I was like, it has to work until MVK lands.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a ton of CUDA stuff in there as well. That's one of the things I've been debating about making a an image for like AI ML folks that has all the CUDA stuff, because that's gigs and gigs of stuff. And I don't want to put. If you want a gaming machine, you shouldn't have to do that.
No, definitely not.
Like, because you end up making a ton of images, and a lot of people will be like, "Well, now that's confusing." And it's like, yes, but no one's made a GUI, right? If you had a GUI that said switch desktop and each KDE blah 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 blah, and it just did all that, you wouldn't have to keep track of that stuff, right? So I like to think about it that way. We're enabling that to be built someday. Right. So it kind of sucks that you have to type a rebase command right now. Wouldn't it be awesome? Like I told you, rebasing back, wouldn't that be cool if that was a calendar widget and you had that NVIDIA driver series and a date at the bottom, and you click, boom, and you reboot into it.
That would be really cool. That.
Yeah. You could totally do that. We can't do that today.
No.
You're gonna have to type a few commands.
It wouldn't be that difficult, like to make a good looking UI, yeah, but like to make something basic, that would be pretty easy to spin up. It's just a matter of someone doing it. You would exec out and run the commands, but what you really want to do is talk to the OS tree API or whatever, whatever thing to make it cool and that thing. The other thing I want to make is, I've been shopping this around, is I want a new terminal. I want a terminal that's just DistroBox native that just talks to Podman. Because the problem is people have I hate that I have to go into my toolboxes and then out of my toolboxes, and then now I have too many of them and stuff, right? If you had a terminal, you would keep your host terminal. That part's key, right? And you just had another terminal that just went into your Ubuntu. Let's say your Arch. Let's say you're running Silverblue right now, but it went into your Arch DistroBox automatically, and you had your favorite package manager. So, like the way the new Windows terminal works with WSL.
Yes. Interesting.
For anyone who has never seen that, so you can like open up like a Linux tab. You can open up what's PowerShell tab. That's I forgot what it's called. Yeah. You can just like open up these different tabs. It just auto does everything for you.
Yeah, and it puts the logo of the distro you have on there and stuff. It's like really nice. So I want a Linux version of that, because this is something I've always wanted to say to people who are like, "Good containers, now it's too complicated." Like, I get it if you don't understand containers, but also think about it this way. This feature was so fundamental in the last decade. Like, people will argue now that maybe WASM or AI or something is even more profound or whatever. That's not my story to tell. But this, in the past decade or whatever, in the heady days, because I don't think we've reached peak container yet. I don't think we're close, right? Like, Kubernetes runs a lot of workloads in the world, but I don't think it's over 20%. So Macs are stuck. They have to use virtual machines if you want Linux, right? Another thing people don't like, I tell them that the majority of Ubuntu's users are Mac users, right? Because they're right. I used to tell people, what do you care more about, that one laptop or the 10,000 instances that person has to maintain? I kind of have to care about the 10,000 right now. And there's that economics again. But what if it was the same? That's hopefully you're starting to understand how I got to this,
right?
To this line of thinking, right? The container was so profound that Microsoft literally paid millions and millions of dollars to make WSL, right? And the first one was cool, right? And then the second one, they realized, hey, we just have to make that VM layer a little bit, faster.
Yeah.
Right? And then people got used to that workflow. Like, if this is an unfortunate thing, you go to Linux conferences, especially cloud conferences, everyone's running Mac and Windows.
Yep.
Right? Everyone is running Macs, including the Microsoft people. But the Microsoft people have a Surface tablet that they bring along with them also. So they can double flex. And then there's like the four of us on Linux desktop. It's like me and the one guy from Red Hat, Josh Burkus. I even know his name because there's only one, So like, I tell people, like, that's why I kind of sound like a desperate madman all the time, right? Like, act like an endangered species, You know, you walk around, you feel like an endangered species, but these people are so passionate about open source, right? That's why it's kind of that tragedy of the desktop. I was like, man, I think I can do this. And that was a mistake. You know, but Microsoft paid a lot of money with a lot of smart people to make that experience. And they hooked it up to Visual Studio Code. And, you know, like people can dunk all they want, but like that experience, like it resonates with people.
Yeah.
Especially the ones who love Linux. There are people out there, you know, like who love Linux, but they just ran out of patience. You know, they're just like, look, work gives me a choice, and I picked the Mac, you know. It's a different vibe now. When VMware bought us, I was like, oh no, they're gonna take my Linux laptop away. The startups don't care. That's why you want to work in startups. And they were like, Linux desktop is okay, but if you have a Mac, you have to have all that managed software. If you pick Windows, you could choose all three. If you choose Windows, it has to have all this managed software. Linux people, you can run your own stuff, but it has to be full disk encrypted, and like you have to, you know, talk to someone in the open source programs office to make sure you're not being a total crazy person about it, you know, because we have a business to run here, right? So the Windows, I don't know how many of you have ever run a corporate managed Windows, like the boot time is just like 45 minutes or whatever, and that's what people think is normal. And the Macs are getting worse and worse in that regard also. Like I said, so I would see what people are doing. You know, people at very, very large like the FANG companies, because you see them at conferences, and nobody can get the projector to work. It's not just Linux and Mac. It's not working for anybody. So you see all the managed BS that people have to do that, right? But developers love their efficiency, and now especially companies realize the value of having very, very efficient developers. They will spend so much money to take care of that person that works 8 hours a day to save that company 1 minute of a thing. That 1 minute doesn't seem like a lot until you have to run it on 50,000 instances, and you're paying for that, right? That adds up, you know, people, that's a science. You know, and so for me, I'm like, if you're a Linux nerd and you're averse to this, this is a feature that was born out of Linux. This did not happen. You know, like a lot of smart people helped to make this happen. And Microsoft had to play for once. They had to play catch up to that. Right. And then people are like, oh no, they want to put their DirectX thing into Vulkan or whatever. They're putting something into Mesa, but it only helps Windows. And people are like, this is awful. I'm like, spend that money, baby. You know? But it's good because it's going to be open source and whatever. There are people who I think being around long enough, I don't get mad or upset when a friend of mine doesn't use Linux, right? I feel disappointed that we blew it. We all blew it, right? Like there was a chance with netbooks, and then there was a really bummer of an Intel graphics card that kind of ruined that, right? And then 6 months later, iPads came out, and that was that. Now netbooks are kind of cool again, right? Those small little form factors, and you have things like frameworks, and System 76 can exist and thrive. You know, like the market's way different now, right? And we never had the tools to do that, and now this is one of those tools, right? This kind of model of running this stuff. So if Microsoft is spending all this money, you know, developers love it. Our competitor, now we need to bring that model back to the Linux desktop, except we have one killer feature. We don't need the virtual machine. That's why when you launch DistroBox and it's instant, right? That thing is instant.
Besides,
the first time. The first time, always, right? Because you got to start it, right? But, you know, if you're in the terminal as much as I am every day, like that one time or whatever, that's a tax you'll pay, right? And that's generally going to be fixed because in the next version of DistroBox, you can declare what you want it to have, and it will just automatically create it for you in the background, and that will go away. Because that's how you do it in cloud. Hey, ding.
DistroBox is such a cool project.
The coolest thing ever. I was there for that thing too. See, because there was a thing called Toolbox, and I was actually afraid of this because there was a time I was like, Red Hat had gone, and Fedora and Red Hat together had gone in on this atomic thing, right? They had atomic workstations. It feels like they pushed way harder than they do with Silverblue and Kinote today, even though these are so much better. Like, I wish we could take the money they spent on marketing back then and have that now for Fedora, you know, and them. But like, it didn't really catch on. It was that weird thing, you know, and like, oh no, you know, whatever. And that was kind of a bummer. Right. And now So I was kind of afraid that these things were on the chopping block, like Toolbox was clearly being, I found out the story was like assigned to a half person to sort of work it, but it wasn't their real job. And not that many people were using it compared to all the other stuff Red Hat makes. Right. Like sometimes you got to do the math. Right. And so Toolbox just wasn't getting the development that it needed. Right. And then Lucas showed up with DistroBox. Right. He did. It's interesting because he did it. Initially, people thought he did it the wrong way. Right. They're like, well, this is a proper Golang program. It's like a proper program. This is just a bunch of bash scripts. Right. But Luca gets it. Right. He knew that he had to be on as many systems as possible. Right. So he was like, I'm going to write this in bash. And there are people today who are they have principal in their titles, and they look at Luca's bash code and they're like, I can't believe someone did this in bash. It's like insane. And he added those features that would have been out of scope for Toolbox at the time, right? A separate home directory, you got to have it, right? That makes, so many things installed in your home directory. So it's nice to have that little separation, and you should be able to click a thing that turns that on and off for whatever distro box you make, and that's what I want to do with the terminal. I call it Project EXO. If any of you want to build that for me, prototype, you take VTE, the same thing GNOME terminal has, you wrap it in a small wrapper, and then you just embed distro box. Just to prove to see if the model works. And then later some kid can rewrite it in Rust and Vulkan accelerate it and do all the business. Right? Because it's got to look good. It's got to have emojis and stuff. That's a thing we learned. Yeah, you got to have that hipster stuff. Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling, so if you have any other specific questions, I could do that too.
No. When DistroBox came out, like obviously DistroBox is not like it's not this original concept. Like it's building on top of what was already there with Toolbox. It's building on top, directly building on top of Podman and Docker. For anyone, I'm sick of these comments. DistroBox can use Docker. Stop telling me it can't. I don't care about your dumb comment. Go read the documentation.
What we say, to use the cloud native term, DistroBox consumes your container runtime. Yeah.
Because I had like 3 or 4 people on that video on uBlue being like, actually, Docker uses DistroBox uses Podman, not Docker. Like, shut up.
There's a reason people make fun of like Linux people. Right? There's a reason that actually meme exists. It's kind of sad.
It's fine.
But hey, I'm one too, dude.
It's fine to be actually when you're right. But when you're not, shut up. I know that it uses Podman on
actually, if you're in Ubuntu, you want to use Docker. If you're in Ubuntu, use Docker with DistroBox. I think because the Podman's in Universe, I think, and at least Docker isn't in main or anything like that. But that repo, everybody's using it, right?
Yeah.
So. But that's what I recommend.
On
my Ubuntu, I had an Ubuntu work machine, and that's I once you have DistroBox, you can't go back. So, and what Luca also did, he also did a few other things, right? I know this, but not a lot of people miss it. He built a community. Like it doesn't matter what you do. He built a community, right?
Yeah.
And the way he responded to bug count, even if he couldn't get to something, he'd be like, "Yeah, I'd love to do this. I can't." Right? As opposed to. So you see issues and you see abandonment stuff, and then a bot closes the issue, and you're like, nobody's gonna care, right? But it's a thing that bothers you, but you don't want to be the person to be like, can someone actually still fix this? Because then someone's gonna come back, and now you have a thing, and sure. So when DistroBox came out, I was like, I could keep whining because I know everybody, so I'm calling people at Red Hat. I was like, hey man, my friend Mark Russell, I think. He works on Podman somewhere at Red Hat. He worked at Canonical for a long time. I was like, hey, man, you got to find some headcount for this Toolbox thing because I'm telling you, it's amazing. He's like, yeah, well, and then I was like, okay, cool, fine. But it's on your radar, right? He's like, it's on my backlog, which is the same as, it's good to talk to you, George. I'll see you. Keep on. But, hey, I don't have to staff a bunch of open source projects. I don't know what those complications are. I'm just trying to make the case for the thing, So when Luca comes around, right, it's just an individual open source, and he just takes off with it, and so the community was number one. Documentation, man. That guy just literally, that is the key to the whole thing. And I'm glad I got the help because I made a video. I think it's still one of my most popular videos. Is how, I didn't even say this is the best way to use. This is just how I use it, and this is this is why I think it's badass, right? And I knew that there'd be some people who, you know, especially if you've been around the block or whatever, they're like, look, I want a stable distro, right? But I gotta have my bling. I have to have that Python library that I need at work.
Yep.
Or whatever. And I started the day with my boss assigned me a new project, and halfway through I'm dist upgrading. Nobody want to do that. You know what I mean? So like DistroBox is the way to do that. And I think it helped energize Toolbox. Right? Like if you go back after DistroBox, I wish 5 people showed up someday, you know, but they have made progress. And more importantly, I think it proves that that's a class. I call Toolbox as a class of software now. That's why I think distros are going to make there'll be a Toolbox one for your favorite distro. That's perfect. And if you're interested in doing that, they actually started a separate repo just for DistroBox images that has all those packages built in. That's where I get all my tips, because I know someone at Collabora, that's where I got the name Collabora in my brain, put a certain Flatpak package in the Debian images, and I hadn't heard of it before, XDG something. And I maintained the Alpine images in there, and I was like, what do I need that package for in my toolbox? I better go find out. So yeah, like I know some people, and I know, you know, one of my PRs on one of my things was like by Endless and stuff like that. And I was like, you know, it kind of proves the model. And whether you use Toolbox or DistroBox, those images are available for anybody, and you can modify them and they'll be perfect. Like at someday, like what I really want to see is someone say, you know, the NVIDIA CUDA enabled PyTorch toolkit blah thing that's like 35 gigs, but at least it works, you know? And if someone uses that to accelerate a thing at work, then good for them. And then our job there is to make sure that A, remember the NVIDIA equals 1 flag in your distro box, and B, that the drivers are actually there on the base image, right? That's kind of our job.
But
right? The kind of
where I was going with bringing up DistroBox is it's one of those things that like it alleviates one of the biggest problems that exists with using one of these image-based systems, where like there is software that obviously if you go make your own custom image, go put whatever you want into it. But if you're using like, you know, Silverblue, or you're using a Steam Deck, for example, like there are certain things that are not going to be in like FlatPub. They're just not there.
Oh yeah.
So having something like DistroBox, having something like Toolbox opens up that ability to just, for those cases, install anything you want.
Yeah. It's like an extra goalie.
Yep.
You know, like why not have that? And especially too, remember there's a lot of old stuff that runs only on Ubuntu 18.04 or whatever. And sometimes you gotta run the thing. Your only other option is to stay on an old distro, and
don't want to do that.
Yeah, that sucks. You know, like why can't I have both things? Surely we can have both things, right? Like that's why when people say, well, I have a rolling release, I have Arch, this is way better than your dumb thing, you know? And it's like, first of all, the Arch god that you all pray to is called SteamOS now, right? So like that has proven that this model is legit, you know? We just got to figure out the customization part. There are a few Arch distros that do this, like people that add it. Another one I was involved with, Chimera OS. That's the one that kept the Steam OS dream alive. Alcazar, I've been involved in that project for a long time. I still run it. Like when people are like, where's, I want a Steam machine with this on it. And I literally have it. I had the new UI and everything because it's an AMD system and it works perfectly. And Chimera OS, they're doing all the work to bundle all the emulators and all that. I don't even have to set up anything. It just comes that way. Great project. That project is run correctly. If that helps, because some people are like, that's a weird name, or it used to be called Gamer OS.
That's a much worse name.
Yeah, I know, but naming things is hard, man. Yeah. So if you actually want that Steam OS lifestyle, now again, like with us, if you run that on the NVIDIA machine with the new UI, it's gonna be janky, right? But if you have an AMD machine, that thing runs legit. I run mine at 4K. And then I have another machine with an RX 580, and I turn on the FSR, and I output at 4K, but you're sitting 9 feet away, so it looks amazing, and it's like locked at 60 frames a second. Friends come over, they have no idea that's an RX 580.
Wow.
It's like amazing. Yeah, like because FSR, you want FSR too, obviously, when you're sitting in front of the thing, right? But you're sitting 9 feet away, you don't care. You care that you have 4 controllers and a wireless thing that works, so your friends can have a good time, right? That's another thing I tell people. We're like, but I like to customize my things and all that stuff. Get that out of. We all go through that phase. Once you get out of that phase, you're going to start to find the fun things that you want to do in Linux. You know, like when you hang out with actual kernel engineers, like sometimes you're like, oh man, I'm sorry, I forgot how to compile a kernel. They're happy. That is the happiest. That is the best thing someone's going to tell them that day, because everything else they're going to hear that day is going to be that something is broken. You know, so like when someone else has a thing like that, they're very happy. So I don't like that gatekeeping of like, well, this is, you know, if you would have read the documentation and maintained your system properly, like a system administrator, the reason I'm doing this is because I was a system administrator for over a decade. Right. And eventually the flex becomes I'm automating it. So if depackage breaks once, twice, 3 times, you know, what was the thing I said? You better automate it. Right. So our stuff is breaking. Now it's breaking remotely, and our stuff will break on the client at some point. Of course it will. But I kind of liken it to playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? You want to add as many things to your saving throw, as many buffs. If you play video like in Destiny, right? You want that buff, and you don't want debuffs. You know, that timer that says when you're going to want to die. Like, I'm here to play Dark Souls, not live it with my Linux machine. You know, like that's cool, but you know, I'm like chill out farming simulator dad now. So like, you know, a lot of it is kind of changing that model, changing that mindset. You know, now some of you are going to be like, this is hardcore, whatever. Cool. You are going to be the next generation of distribution developer. Like you're going to be like these skills and stuff that you have, you're still going to have them. You're still going to need them. I actually use my package manager as much as I ever did before. And I'm in Ubuntu toolboxes and Alpine one. So I don't even know RPM. I have to have someone help me, even though I run Fedora. Right. But I'm doing the package thing, you know, oh man, here's a program. I got to get this test is failing. You know, I'm doing all that stuff. I'm just not doing it on the host. And it's recognizing that I need that part. I ain't got time for that one right now, you know? But virtualization and other machines exist. So if we all do it, you know, it's like time to go hard on Arch. And then you do that, you know, we all do and even if you don't do Arch, you do it. I still know people, myself included, every year. It's like, you know what? It's time to bust out my old mutt config. Right. And then you modernize it and then you run mutt for like a week. Right. And then you're like, yeah, I remember that whole enabling IMAP in your GI. I forgot how to do that. Do I have to generate a token? Like all this stuff. And you're going back and you're doing all the nerd stuff. And you're like, well, if I'm going to do mutt, I might as well just have Vim embedded, right? Oh, but it can't be normal Vim. I got to try this Neo Vim all the kids are talking about, right? And then you end up, you know, making a thing like uBlue, but it's something else, right? That's the thing. Like this started off in a home lab. That's that home lab geek Linux culture, man. That's where all the stuff comes from. And then you run it for a few days and you're like, cool, see you next year. And then I switch back to Gmail because I have a job to do. You know, or more than likely you say, wow, I'm glad I don't have to use email anymore as much, you know, and then it's back to Slack hell. And that's a different sort of pain. Same thing, right? It's like, oh, I wonder how that WeChat Slack plugin is going. Right. And then you find yourself in the terminal doing the business. So like if you have those itches, absolutely do that. You know, you're a content creator, so you have to run all
I
the
can
stuff.
turn these.
You have no choice. You have no choice but to try it all.
I could go and use uBlue and have all that be nice, but it's like having this stuff just break randomly, assuming it doesn't get in the way of the content, is like I can turn that into content. Because your content
would suffer if you didn't know. If you were only running Silverblue and you had an opinion on Arch, no one's going to care, right? But what you can do is when you get that second machine, you want that machine to be as boring as possible and like never.
Well, yeah, when I set up at some point, I'll set up a capture PC. It's probably going to be running Silverblue or something. I don't know. It just works.
Well, if you need something special, I know a guy. I can hook you up. with your own custom image. Make Brody Linux. I'm hoping one of you content creators could like run with this once it's like amazing, and like whatever thing you reviewed that week, you add it to the image, and you make people use it, and then they have to do the thing, and then the next week that goes away, right? And you have your Brody's default wallpaper of the week, which is relatively easy to do compared to like being setting up your PPA with your stuff in it. So like you could do all, like somebody's gonna do something nuts, and like we haven't even really thought about it, right? Like I think of stuff like because I worked as a network administrator at a university, right? Michigan State Spartan Linux. It's going to have all the right stuff, and when you log in, it's going to have all the RSS feeds subscribed to everything on campus, and the calendar is going to be hooked up. And when you double click, it'll Kerberos auto off to your, like all the stuff that you want in a lab. And like when we beat Michigan, the wallpaper is going to be different that Monday. Like you're thinking of all the things that universities and schools would do. If you look at the amount of work, especially in the U.S., I don't know how it is in Australia, in the US, the high school robotics teams are these super professionalized thing. Like why isn't
not even remotely here?
Oh man, like this is like this crazy. There's a lot of effort that goes into that stuff, and I was like, man, why don't these schools, like, where's your computer club at? Where's their varsity sport that could be the cool thing that they're proud of? But you want to set that up in a toolkit for them in a way that's, if you were to be like every school's going to have a Linux distro. First, I mean, you wouldn't have any signups, but if it was like a cool thing that you did as a hobby while you're learning this stuff, because one of the nice things I like about this cloud native model is everything you're learning, like when you're learning Podman and things like that, you're learning a skill that people pay money for. Like people will, like, you will learn that skill. And sure, there are people who make money packaging and things like that. But right now, in the market right now, knowing how Docker / Podman works is a skill that if you're playing around with a Linux desktop, right? And then if your parents are like, what are you doing? And your friends, why are you wasting your time on that thing? Being like, yeah, I just deployed my first Kubernetes cluster. Deal with it. Like at the end of like, if you have a friend that's like,
you're actually like building,
why do you use Linux? And they make fun of you. It's like, good luck watching Netflix tonight if Linux didn't exist, or your TV even working. Right, so like
yep
like the desktop thing is a thing that we got to fix, right? And like that's why I'm so keen on bringing those concepts, right? Because we know mobile work, people are like, you just want to turn my desktop into Android, right? Think about the payload. We're talking about the model, not the payload, right? So like if you gave it, and Android has that special thing where you have to have the image for that specific hardware, right? Right. So like, but if you could have that, you reboot into a thing. And remember CyanogenMod back in the day, how cool that was? Like, and those images were relative, even though there was some crazy stuff in there, they were relatively safe compared to like, you imagine if you had to have an Arch-based thing on all of those phones, like people would have, like that. We know that model works with the images, right? So like, what if we could have that cool customization? That's my answer to people like, you can't customize it, is the tools aren't here yet. This is rough cut with one community manager and 5 people who knew what they were doing, right? At some point, there's going to be people way smarter than us that we either take our stuff or throw it away and start over or whatever. And that's what I've been saying this entire time since Linus broke that computer, right? I was so disappointed that the discourse was, this person's an idiot for typing that in.
Yeah.
And how dare they not be a Debian administrator, right? First of all, every Debian administrator has typed that command in. And sometimes it does work. That's why, I don't know if I would have tried it on a video in YouTube, but they also knew what they were doing. Everybody knows Linux has this problem, right? So I was like, thank God someone finally is like talking about this. We need to fix it. And I think people were dunking on him. And I do want to say this because it's important, right? People were dunking on System 76, right? And if you notice, except for some rare exceptions, people who worked in distros didn't say anything because they were busy checking their stuff. And then maybe after, right, they're like, whoa, wait, would that affect us? Hold up. Okay, everything's green. Hold on. Wait, okay, let me test that, because it happens to everybody. And it was just their turn. right? It was just their turn. And in cloud, when there's an outage, they have this thing called hug ops, right? Like when that intern messed up that email and sent a template. If you're on HBO Max, you got an email that was like a template and it had all the variables in it instead. And someone figured out it was like an intern that did that. And it trended, hug ups for the intern, and then you had really experienced people saying, let me tell you about the time I knocked out a region of Amazon US East 1 or something. People are, let me tell you about the time I brought down a production database at Netflix, and there was like the supportive thing. There's always going to be people that are slam dunking, on other people. But like at the same time, I was disappointed that wasn't the rallying cry to fix this thing. So one of my very first tweets, and if people that are like, this guy's wrong or whatever, I could probably be wrong, but I'm also bringing a lot of data. I went through askubuntu.com. I had helped start the site. So I was on it so much, people thought I was a bot. There's literally a question that says, is Jorge Castro a bot? I had touched over 10% of it. Look that up. I had touched so many questions. And so I knew exactly what had happened, right? Because this happens to everybody. This happens to everybody who's used an apt system or a depackaged system, and it's not just Ubuntu. Before that, I was running Debian for like way longer, and so I was like really disappointed because Silverblue was around, and I was on the horn with Christian Schaller, the actual boss on the Red Hat desktop team. I was like, man, dude, now's our chance, like it's almost like you're in the trench, right? And then like that last X-Wing gets shot and you're like, dude, it's coming up. We got to take the shot. So now's the chance to show, because we know the model works. But inertia is hard, man. And that's why I've been so adamantly about the model way more than the images. Like some people are going to be like, I don't like this image. They made the wrong choice. This is, that's not what we're talking about here. Like what we're talking about, and this is also why I don't recommend a single one. If you like vanilla, if you like micro OS, if you like endless OS, y'all are going to have the same pain points. You need more FlatHub and Flatpak portals. You need more apps on FlatHub, right? The distro box toolbox experience needs to be better. People get confused with IDEs and they don't know what dev containers are.
Right.
And there's plugins that you need to install to figure all that out, right? But if you install GNOME Builder, which is Flatpak native, like the thing works amazing in Flatpak, right? Because it's designed that way. So we have to make that model transition, right? And no matter which of these that you choose, those are going to be your pain points. So don't be afraid that you pick the wrong one. Like OpenSUSE Micro OS is amazing. Like if there's one that because Vanilla's in the middle of a transition, they're rebasing, so you got to give them a little bit to figure it out, and they're going to be round 2, But if my dad wanted to switch to Linux right now, the only choice is OpenSUSE Micro OS, in my opinion. Unless if you're donating a machine, because it comes with educational content and stuff, and that's cool. But like Micro OS, it takes care of the codecs. It has the Flatpak stuff. A lot of the stuff in my image is literally just ripping off with OpenSUSE. Like the very first image of Bluefin when it was called Ubuntu was that same Zenity script that OpenSUSE Micro OS uses, that janky. No one has ported Zenity to GTK4 libed Weta. I did not know this because I was like, oh man, we'll find a pretty one and then just make that. It didn't exist. So that's why we had to make a thing called Yafty, which looks better than Zenity and it's declarative. So you can say, I want these Flatpaks instead of like hacking a bash script. And I'm hoping to get where we are hoping. Marco, my friend, is the one who's kind of leading that. And he's adding in all the tests and everything. Cause I was like, man, wouldn't it be great if OpenSUSE looked at this someday? And hey, you don't have to choose us, but put us in the running. Tell us, it's cool when you're a finalist in a, I wouldn't complain if I was number 2 in an F1 race. Like if I lost to Max, oh man, that sucks. I'm only number 2. So like you want to make these things open, and you want people to use your stuff, like especially when you're doing that. And I think there's a lot of what I'm hoping for is that those pain points that people are struggling with are now obvious. So we know that we need a graphical thing at some point, right? But in order to do that, we're going to need a few things. Someone's going to have to hack one up so we can test the model, and that should be okay. But then long term, someone's going to have to engage with Fedora and CoreOS, OS3 upstream, and do it the right way with tests in a real programming language that's all CI'd and doing all that stuff. But in the meantime, what uBlue can do is be that prototype. Like worst case, I think what we can do is provide Fedora, hey, here are the things that people found out they actually want in a base image and things that they don't. Because we won't put everything on a base image. We have a process. We wrote it down. Otherwise, we'd end up putting everyone's text editor in there, right? So there's certain places where we say we purposely, don't deviate from Fedora in this case. We will for hardware enablement, right? Because you don't want to set up that OBS virtual cam. That's a nightmare for normal people. But wouldn't it be great if more people could use it? That would at least give you an idea, especially since we are measuring all of the polls, right? If I come back and say these images are, and ultimately I did say that I had an agenda, at some point I want Red Hat to come back hard on desktop, right? Like, yeah, they have enterprise desktops and all that stuff, and, I have not said nice things about Snap recently, but, I have worked at Canonical for a long time. And even if you don't like anything that they do, you want Ubuntu Core Desktop. That exists. That is a thing. Like, you just had to find it in James SH's little personal build thing, but I know where to look. See, I know where all the bodies are buried. So they have it, right? You just need to tell them that you want it, and you have to be okay with a thing, right? Sure, there's things I don't like about snaps, but they have to work on portals to make that work, right? So if Canonical wants to spend a bunch of money to make a Steam snap, which is basically solved already in the Flatpak for Steam, that's your money to spend. Cool, as long as I don't know, man, as long as it's open, like who cares? If that helps, if even if you don't like Ubuntu, if PPAs go away for end users, because the PPAs need to stick around. That's another thing, right? Because we're using all that stuff. Some people like to conflate it. They turn it into packagers versus Flatpak and Snap, right? They're like, respect your packagers and stuff. I was like, I do. That's why I have you talking to the metal. That's why you are talking to the metal, right? Like, I don't want a bash Flatpak. You don't need, there's nothing you need in there, that's like decouple. You want that to be in the distro model. Yeah. Distros follow the pace of the kernel, right? They release. There's a reason that distros release in April and October. Robbie Williamson taught me this because we were trying to figure out the best release model for Ubuntu. If you look at all the countries in the world, all of their major holidays, the amount of engineers you can have in every time zone, because these are worldwide projects, April and October are pretty much your only choices, right? In a lot of places, or the least worst ones. So that's how GNOME is spring fall, right? This time Fedora and Ubuntu were 2 days apart.
Wow.
Yeah. And Fedora 38 and 2304 because
that one shouldn't have been difficult for you.
Yeah. The only do you know what the only late Ubuntu release was? 606, the first LTS.
Okay.
It should have been 604.
Yeah,
but it wasn't. Yeah.
I
think translations needed to bake. I don't remember the reasons, but if you do,
Dapper Drake,
comment below after you smash that like and subscribe button. I do try to learn a lot from YouTubers, for sure. Yeah, because you all know how to summarize something that's very technical, but are willing to take the risk to get flamed by a bunch of nerds because you know that your analogy is like making the point.
Right.
Like you don't care that GNOME used to be the GNU Network Object Model Environment, right? Like,
sure, what was that?
Yeah, that was GNOME's first name, the GNOME Network Object Model Environment. Yeah.
Okay.
So around some concepts called Corba. Look that up. You don't want to look that up, dude. Don't look that up. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, but people would nitpick at you, right? They'll be like, "Hey, you're the pronunciation ones, especially, right? Because that's how you know when someone works on a thing, right? They call it GNOME, right? So it's like, he talks.
Yeah,
like
whenever I mention anything related to Linux to someone who's not involved in Linux, and I say GNOME, there's always like a weird look on their face. Like, what did you just say?
Yeah, I don't tell them anything.
Yeah,
I don't really.
I only tell them anything. I don't talk to people about Linux unless they ask something.
I don't. If someone has an old computer and I know they just need a browser, I don't even. I just tell them, I'm like, here you go.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then I SSH into it every once in a while to do that. But I'm not even going to do that anymore. What we're going to do is I'm going to set up a slow rolling tag. I call it GTS for Bluefin. It's Grand Touring support. So newer than an LTS, but not Fedora 38. So what I'm going to do is it's just Fedora -1. Because I found out from a bunch of buddies that worked at Canonical, I was like, man, how do you use Fedora at work? Because that thing does move fast. You know, I mean, it's high quality, you know, but things are way more automated now. And, you know, Fedora and Ubuntu used to be way worse, man. They used to be way worse. And I was like, oh, that's not a little bit aggressive. You know, so, my second day, the Linux people told me, you want to run Fedora -1, right? Because RHEL is a bit too old, right? And Fedora, you want, that's cool, whatever. And then they explained the model back to me, and they're like, you're still getting something new every 6 months, but your extensions are already ported, and they always bring the kernel and the Mesa stuff back to the -1. So what are you missing out on? Except, and I call that the throttle with these image-based systems, right? Because you can go from Rawhide and, you know, Enterprise Linux is Alma and Rocky. I think Rocky, I shouldn't have mentioned which one. One of them has an OS tree image because obviously for server and edge, that makes sense. And I was like, what about desktop? And they're like, no one's asking for that. I was like, I am now. Right, because if I gave you Bluefin, but it was based on CentOS Stream or whatever, that's Ubuntu LTS. You know, but you see something cool on OMG Ubuntu, you can rebase up, you know, and get the latest bling, right? And then they're like, that's pretty cool. Oh, this is pretty stable. I think I'll stick here. If not, you switch back. See, that's one thing I also want your audience to understand is it is so frustrating to see and know the hard work that these people put in this software. And then when there's an upgrade, to see that work. There's nothing that broke my heart more than like Joey, who was like the nicest person in the world, like would write the most amazing article about a cool app that we never know about these things, man. You have to, especially now in FlatHub, I see stuff that I never even heard of, and someone tells me about it, and I was like, man. And then at the very end, they have that PPA instructions, knowing that a certain percentage of those people in 6 months are in trouble.
Yep.
You know, and sure, for the longest time, we did it. We tried to fix a symptom, right? Ask Ubuntu was a great resource because now it's just right in Google, and people dunk on the Amazon lens for Unity, right? But they forget the Ask Ubuntu lens that we made, that you could just hit super and type your problem in, and we would auto sort them for you and prune them, and you would get the results. And we took that information from the Ask Ubuntu API or whatever, and we took all that crowdsourced stuff that the community had given and used those tools to filter back to them, right? That's why I know it sucks that you didn't like the Amazon thing, but now every YouTuber has an affiliate link at the bottom, which I think is hilarious.
I think, like,
you know, there were cool lenses. The Wikipedia one would have been.
I think the issue with the lens is that it was just there. And it was just auto-enable. Like, if you have like an affiliate link in the bottom of your video, like you can choose not to use that. But if you're using your search on those versions of Ubuntu, it was just there by default, and you would have to like go out of your way to get rid of it.
Yeah, and it's always the implementation. Right. Now I would have done it differently now, right? Because I think now people understand the economics of what it takes to fund having a cool desktop, right? So if I were to do Unity today, let's say we're adding a lens or whatever, I would say, check it out. We're going to do these Unity lenses. They're going to be open source because to this day, right, it can only be in Ubuntu unless it's like open source. Exceptions are made for hardware, but you got to do that, right? Some distros don't. That's why Fedora is the way it is, and that's why I have to make this thing. Right, and I were to say, so here's the first one's going to be Ask Ubuntu, right? We're going to filter that good stuff that you have, and we'll add Wikipedia, maybe a cool few sound ones. There will be commercial ones, and when you have those, they're going to fund the development for all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we need your help to make that classy, because I think now it took a while, because back then it did seem really bad.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm like, man, compared to what your Chromebook does,
yeah,
like your average, not even a Pixel, man, like the really crappy Android phones where that thing is only malware, you know? I was like, surely we can all figure out a classy way to have it, right? And how would you do it today, right? You would leave a thing for an affiliate link, right? So for YouTubers, say, hey, put your code in the Unity lens if you like my content, and then we can figure it out, right? Or like you could plug into your favorite thing. Like think about all of the cool stuff that could have been happening by having that API search thing. It didn't really work out, right? I think technically it was also janky. It wasn't as fun to use as like you think it should be. And also when you look back, even when they do it right, like in Windows, like when I'm opening that menu, so like that's not what I'm looking for at this current time. I was looking for this stuff, I would be opening a browser, doing these things. But if you had a dedicated key, let's separate it from the super key, right? Separate it from the Windows key. And then it was like a cool spotlight thing that came down and kind of gave you information and did all that stuff. And all the stuff that these productivity tools.
It also had the issue where Amazon's API at the time was a little bit jank, and you couldn't properly filter out adult products.
Yeah,
that was a problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of. But hey, you've already naked people.
Especially if you're a fan of like Dungeons and Dragons, you type in dungeon, and
not what you're looking for.
No.
Hey, but if you're into that, I want to cut. Yeah, I mean, also at that time, right? You have to have those kind of conversations, right? But if you started with something like Wikipedia or someone else who has done that filtering for you, and you don't have to be the one to do that, like what if the Unity lens was the Arch Wiki, right? And there was a little section that had the thing you wanted, and you can make that really slick to update your system.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. That's the stuff I was hoping we would get. Unfortunately, everyone got bent around the axle around the whole thing, and it didn't work. The first versions of Unity were not performant, right? They were not up to the level. 1104, I think in particular, was not good at all. But you also have to remember, like, it was one of those things where you had to wait. FGLRX was around back then, right? And they would sort of kind of help us out and give you a pre-release driver a little bit ahead, but not nearly enough for what it takes an engineer to make it work. So you're shipping the thing, hoping AMD ships it when they say they're going to. Are they? I don't know. But you got to go into it, assuming that because you can't wait. They're making money. You're not. So, things were harder back then as far as drivers are so much better now, man. Like drivers are just so much better that if you wanted to, you could do it. And that's why I think it's cool that Cosmic could start off as a prototype, as a GNOME extension, right? And then they can go do their thing, right? And a lot of people, they get upset. I remember one of the very first bugs people filed, please don't do this, right? And I went in there, that downvote was it's like, you've earned it. I was like,
yeah.
I mean, hey, it's their money to spend. Cool, do a good job. Hell yeah. You never know. One thing I learned from someone who worked on the Chrome project, before they launched Chrome, they were talking internally. And if you're the person that told me this story and it's secret, sorry. They had hired a bunch of browser people because you can't launch a browser without hiring people.
Sure.
They had a bunch of Netscape was gone by then, I think, right? And they were like, you don't want to make a browser. Like, you really don't want to make a browser. It's like so hard or whatever. So there were a lot of people on that team that knew browsers, but there were also a lot of people. I wasn't there, but this is how it was explained to me. But it makes the point, right? And there are a lot of people who had never worked on a browser before, right? And they had no preconceptions on how to do it, And I remember when Chrome first came out, they had that comic book, and it had all your favorite open source nerds on it. Like Chris DeBona was in there, and because they had worked on this and like all that kind of stuff, and it was like the cool thing, right? And Chromium, I mean, things are a little not as awesome now. But I mean, the product is better.
Mm-hmm.
But back those days, we like to look back at those days as the good old days, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it was cool. And I remember having discussions at UDS. I really wanted to switch Chromium to Chromium by default. Like I back in the day, anyone could make a session at an Ubuntu Developer Summit, and you'd have to write out why, and you would go. And I would always come with the same apps: Chromium and Banshee, which was the music player that I was really into. But it was mono, so everybody had to hate on it, And like we had someone from the Chromium team speak, and they talked about how they set it all up, and that engineers are doing the engineering business, and things like that. And you kind of get to see all of that. But I think it's also important because everyone thought IE had won, and why would you even try? Like, why would you even try? That's ridiculous. It's absurd. But they were looking at it the longer picture. They were like, all our money comes from the web. Therefore, we need to own the web, no matter how much it costs. And now we're in the IE situation all over again.
Yeah.
Hey, you also have choices now. Like even though it's like, it's all just Chromium underneath.
Yeah.
And like, but I have a Chromium browser, and then I have Firefox is what I rock every day.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
sorry, I could go all day. By the way, I didn't even bore you to death. We can do this whenever you want, man.
Usually, I would end the show like half an hour ago, but like you just kept going. I was like, I don't want to stop this.
Man. I'm not, man, dude. I met a lot of cool people, and like they bust their ass on the stuff every day. That's why I get into it, and that's why I'm like trying to bring that positivity. Get the thing.
Yeah.
Let's do this. We know what it takes a village to solve this problem. So let's go, man. Let's fix Linus's problem.
Yeah.
Not Torvald's. I think his computer works.
Yeah, probably.
I meant the other one.
Well, let people know where they can find you, where they can find your work, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, go to uBlue.it. Like you blew it, like you pointed a laptop.
I love that name. It's so good.
But universal blue like totally makes sense. Right. So and like I said, it's fun to like make a funny little joke, but then like be serious about it. And because I'm using Ubuntu every day on the thing. So yeah, go to uBlue.it, and then at the bottom there's links to our Discord, and I think my Hachyderm, and on Twitter I'm at George at hachyderm.io. That is the cool Mastodon server I'm on. So
I'll leave all of that stuff in the description down below if anyone wants to go check it out.
Yeah, and smash that like and subscribe button.
Yeah, all that. As for me, the main channel is Brody Robertson. I do videos there 6 days a week, something like that. Go check it out. Links, videos, all fun stuff. The gaming channel, Brody on Games. I stream on YouTube and Twitch twice a week.
Ooh, really?
Yeah.
Get in on that.
Been playing some Yakuza recently, which is very fun.
I'm playing Division 2, man. That game has hours. It's worth the Uplay, Jank.
And if you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea, and if you're watching the video, the audio version, RSS feed, iTunes, other things. Just go to a podcast platform, you'll find it there. There is also clips, so if you don't want to watch the entire thing, I don't know, there were clips, all that fun stuff.
Did I give you good clips? I hope you have good clips.
I will find stuff. I go back through. I don't like timestamp stuff. I just go back through and like jump back through topics. I think it was a good idea. If you've not seen it yet, go back and watch last week's episode with Sick Codes. He is the guy who hacked the John Deere tractors and played Doom on them. Among many other ridiculous things. The
repercussions that has. Like
John Deere is really determined to find out what his name and address is, and he refuses to give it to them.
It's amazing. I'm a fan. Right to repair, you have to have it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that should be pretty much everything. So I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say?
Try it if you can. I think of this as like a rocket ship. We're going on exploring where no person has been before. If you go on my YouTube channel, I have a video of Captain Kirk's opinion on immutable systems. And yeah, it's, sometimes you might get stranded on a planet. We might have to come back for you, but the adventure is there. And once you get used to it, like there are people, once they get it, that's it for them. And We're building it together. We're not taking away anything from you except pain if you choose to opt in. But we're definitely going for it, right? All flat packs, zero trust. Go for it. You know, you have to have Wayland for this, so the security works. So X ain't coming with. Sorry, it'll be around for a while, but someday that is gonna be removed from the image, and we will celebrate that day. So yeah, I'm looking for people who really, really want to flex their Linux skills. Like if you want to learn how to do server cloud stuff, if you think all of this stuff I'm talking about is interesting to you, you could do a lot worse than trying to bring that cloud native model to the desktop, because then you're going to want to bring that to you for work. Because the benefit, I could do a whole video on that, just like making it rock. Sorry, you said last word and I just kept going.
Yeah, I know. You just go on a whole nother
try it, man. Try it. You're going to edit it to just say, just try it.
No, I'll leave it all in there. It's fine. Yeah,
but check it out. If I've got hours of YouTube videos on my channel, just me kind of blabbing about this stuff, and we're always happy to answer questions. So like, no one's gonna yell at you unless you come swinging at me or something. I don't know.
Like
we haven't had to kick anyone off the Discord yet. So.
You know the guy you replied to my comments, Terry, who's always, Terry, the guy who was like, well, actually, I'm gonna find the exact comment.
Show me. Yeah, I'll be like, show me your GitHub repo. Show me what you got. Flex. Show me what you can do.
Let's see, Terry.
That's my challenge to like the system administrators out there.
It was the immutable.
If you maintain your systems like this, and you probably have the Linux skills to fix the thing that you hate the most, but you have to get the model. That model, you have to. That's the thing you have to give up. You can't compromise on that design, because the entire thing is based on that design. So.
Yeah, the comment in question was immutable. I don't trust myself using Linux, and a problem solved by simply getting off your backside, doing proper backups, and understanding how Linux works better. Fix that for you. You can thank me later.
Every single person that I know that works on very, very large systems that have millions and millions of dollars going through them, they will say, yes, I don't trust myself. I don't trust anybody at all. You know, there's systems out there where after you SSH to it, it's considered dirty. It gets cleaned. Like the automated, like humans, we don't want them. You only want them there to make that decision. Like for a restore from backup, you definitely want a human to be there, right? Like there's certain things, but for a lot of it, if it's toil, stop celebrating toil. That's my last message. Stop celebrating toil, and let's move on to the real problem.
This is your PPS, your PPPS, your PPPPS.
Yes, my PPPS. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna end it there before you go on another tangent.
I know.
Cool. That should be it then, and I'm out.